close your eyes. Let the heavy curtain of the present fall away, and let the darkness behind your eyelids turn into the deep velvet indigo of a winter sky. Breathe in slowly. The air here is different, crisper, carrying the scent of wood smoke, damp wool, and the faint metallic tang of frost settling on iron. We are drifting back, floating on the quiet current of time until the modern world dissolves into silence. We are landing in the late autumn of the year 1095, in the rolling dormant fields of France. The ground beneath our feet is hard and cold, and the wind whispers through leafless oaks, carrying with it a tension that feels like electricity before a storm. History is about to crack open, but for now there is only the murmur of a crowd and the pale light of a November sun struggling to pierce the grey clouds. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Now, let the silence return. We stand in a wide, open field just outside the small city of Clermont. The city walls, built of dark volcanic stone, loom in the distance, but they cannot contain the sea of people gathered here. There are thousands of them, bishops in heavy robes that drag in the mud, knights shivering in chainmail that saps the heat from their bodies, and common folk with dirt under their fingernails and hope in their eyes. They are waiting. The world in this moment is a fractured, frightened place. Europe is a collection of warring fiefdoms, a place where kings have little power and local lords fight endlessly over scraps of land. Violence is woven into the fabric of daily life. It is as common as the rain. But there is a deeper fear here, one that keeps these people awake at night. The fear of the soul's peril. In this age, sin is not an abstract concept. It is a heavy physical weight, a stain that must be scrubbed clean. High on a wooden platform, a figure rises. This is Pope Urban II. He is a man of sharp intellect and political savvy, a Frenchman himself who understands the hearts of these people. He raises a hand, and the murmuring crowd falls into a hush so profound you can hear the snapping of banners in the wind. Urban has received a letter, a desperate plea from far to the east, from the Byzantine Emperor Alexios in Constantinople. The emperor asked for a few hundred knights to help guard his borders against the rising Turkish armies. But Urban sees something else. He sees an opportunity to heal the bleeding wounds of Europe, to stop Christians from killing Christians, and to turn their swords outward toward a common, distant goal. He begins to speak, and his voice, though not thunderous, carries a terrifying clarity across the cold field. He paints a picture of the East, of the holy city, Jerusalem. To the medieval mind, Jerusalem is not just a city on a map. It is the center of the world, the literal navel of the earth, the place where heaven touches the ground. Urban tells them that this sacred place, where Christ walked and died, is in chains. He speaks of pilgrims being harassed, of shrines desecrated, stories that are part truth, part rumour, and entirely designed to ignite the heart. He is not just giving a speech, he is crafting a new reality. He tells the knights standing there, men whose lives are defined by bloodshed and the guilt that comes with it, that they do not need to abandon their swords to find salvation. This is the great alchemy of the Crusades. He transforms war into penance. He offers them a way to fight and be holy at the same time. Let those who have been robbers now be knights, he proclaims. Let those who have been fighting against their brothers and relatives now fight in a proper way against the barbarians. It is a psychological masterstroke. You can feel the shift in the crowd, a release of tension that has been building for decades. The guilt of their violent lives is suddenly lifted, replaced by a divine mandate. Historians still argue whether the crowd truly erupted with the famous cry of Deus Vult, God wills it, in one unified roar, or if that slogan was polished and perfected by chroniclers years later. But the sentiment is undeniably real. Whether shouted or whispered, the feeling ripples through the thousands gathered there. God is watching, and he has finally given them a task. The reaction is immediate and chaotic. Adhemar, the bishop of Le Puy, a man of immense stature and piety, is the first to step forward. He falls to his knees and begs permission to go, his face wet with tears. It is a piece of theatre, likely planned in advance between him and the Pope, but it works perfectly. All around the field, men begin to shout their vows. In a frenzy of devotion, they take knives and shear their own expensive cloaks into strips, sewing crude crosses onto their shoulders and chests. Red cloth against drab wool, a badge of honour that marks them as cruce signati, those signed with the cross. The term crusade does not even exist yet. They call themselves pilgrims, armed pilgrims, setting out on a journey from which many know they will never return. As the sun begins to set behind the volcanic peaks of the Auvergne, the cold deepens, but the heat of the moment keeps them warm. The news travels out from Clermont not like a decree, but like a fever. Preachers fan out across the countryside, carrying Urban's message to villages that have never seen a map, to people who believe Jerusalem is a city paved with actual gold and gems, suspended somewhere just below the clouds. The response is far greater than Urban ever intended. He wanted a professional army of knights. What he gets is a migration. In the smoky halls of castles, lords begin to mortgage their lands to pay for armour and supplies. They sell their forests to the church, trade their ancestral rights for silver, all to buy the horses and weapons needed for a journey of 3,000 miles. It is a staggering gamble. We often think of crusaders as greedy men seeking fortune, and later many were. But in these early days, for the first crusade, the cost of going is often 4 times a knight's annual income. They are bankrupting themselves for a promise of the soul. There is a dark humour in it, men selling the very land they spent their lives fighting over, just to leave it behind for a desert they have never seen. But it is not just the rich. In the mud-walled huts of the peasantry, the message takes on a wilder, more dangerous form. They see this not as a military campaign, but as the beginning of the apocalypse. They believe that if they just walk east, God will provide. They look at the geese flying overhead and think they are messengers from the Holy Spirit. They pack their few belongings, iron pots, wooden spoons, woolen blankets, into carts and prepare to walk. The world is on edge, tilting toward the east. In the quiet of the night, after the council is dispersed, the fires of the encampment glow like fallen stars on the dark plain. Men and women sit by the warmth, looking up at the vast, indifferent universe, feeling chosen. They do not know the horrors that await them. They do not know about the thirst that will turn their tongues black in the Anatolian scrub, or the sieges that will drive them to eat the leather of their own shoes. They only know that the Pope has opened a door to heaven, and all they have to do is walk through it, sword in hand. The wind picks up again, rattling the bare branches of the trees. The decision is made. The great machinery of war and faith has been switched on, and its gears are beginning to grind. The peace of the old world is shattered, replaced by a singular, consuming purpose. Europe is mobilizing, waking from its slumber, with a weapon in its hand and a prayer on its lips. The road to Jerusalem is open, and it is paved with good intentions and the promise of blood. As the fires burn down to embers, the first chapter of this long tragedy closes, not with a battle, but with a word, whispered in the dark, "Go." The winter thaw comes slowly to northern France, the ice retreating into the mud to reveal a world that is waking up hungry and restless, and as the green shoots of spring begin to push through the cold earth in 1096, a strange and ragged energy begins to move across the landscape. We are drifting away from the castles of the High Lords now, moving down into the valleys and the villages, where the air smells of wet thatch and wood smoke. Here, the Pope's grand strategy has dissolved into something far more chaotic and far more human. While the great princes and their armoured knights are still gathering their supplies, calculating the cost of grain and horses, the common people have decided they cannot wait. They are moving already, driven by a fervour that burns hotter than any forge. Leading them is not a king in golden armour, but a small, scruffy man on a donkey. His name is Peter the Hermit. Picture him for a moment. He is short, his face weathered by years of fasting, his cloak stained with the dust of 1,000 miles. He refuses to eat bread or meat, living only on wine and fish, and he radiates a kind of intense, vibrating charisma that makes people want to drop their tools and follow him. His donkey, perhaps the most patient creature in all of history, is almost as famous as he is. People pluck hairs from its tail to keep as holy relics, leaving the poor beast looking a bit patchy but undeniably sanctified. This is the People's Crusade, a vast rambling river of humanity pouring out of France and Germany. They are not soldiers. They are farmers, weavers, shoemakers, and families with children sitting atop carts piled high with pots and pans. They have no supply lines, no maps, and no real idea of the distance they must travel. There is a heartbreaking innocence to them. As they march through the German countryside, passing the stone walls of cities like Speyer and Worms, the children in the wagons point to every castle and large town they see, tugging on their mothers' sleeves to ask, "Is that Jerusalem? Are we there yet?" It is a question that brings a weary smile to our lips across the centuries, a reminder of just how small their world had been until this moment. But innocence has a shadow side, and as this massive, hungry mob moves east, the light of their devotion begins to flicker with something darker. In their desperate need for funds and their twisted logic of holy war, elements of this chaotic army turn against the Jewish communities of the Rhineland. It is a moment of profound tragedy, a stain on the movement before it has even left Europe. Historians still argue whether Peter the Hermit lost control of his followers, or if he was simply powerless to stop the storm he had summoned, but the result is a scar on history, a reminder that fear and faith, when mixed in the wrong proportions, can turn neighbours into enemies. The narrative moves on, leaving the smoke of the Rhine behind as the great mass of people flows down the Danube River. The journey is a grueling test of endurance. We float above them, watching the seasons change from the mud of spring to the dusty heat of summer. They clash with local garrisons in Hungary over food, their holy mission looking more and more like a desperate migration of locusts to the people whose lands they cross. By the time they reach the golden walls of Constantinople, they are ragged, starving, and sun-blinded. The Byzantine emperor, Alexios, looks out from his palace windows and feels a deep, sinking dread. He had asked for a scalpel, a small force of elite knights, and the West has sent him a sledgehammer made of glass. He sees their exhaustion, their lack of discipline, and he knows they are doomed if they cross into enemy territory. He advises them to wait, to rest, to let the professional armies catch up. But they have walked 2,000 miles on the fuel of their dreams, and they cannot stop now. They believe God is their general, and that walls will crumble before their hymns. Reluctantly, Alexios ferries them across the Bosphorus Strait, from the safety of Europe to the unknown dangers of Asia Minor. The air here is different, hotter, drier, smelling of sage and heated stone. They are now in the land of the Kilij Arslan, the Sultan of Rum. The name Rum echoes Rome, for the Turks have conquered these Roman lands, and they know the terrain better than they know the backs of their own hands. The Crusaders, confident and careless, split up and raid the countryside, intoxicated by their arrival in the lands of the Bible. They capture a fortress called Zerigordos, but the victory is a trap. The Turkish forces simply surround the castle and wait. They cut off the water supply. For 8 days the Crusaders suffer a thirst so terrible that chroniclers say they resorted to drinking the blood of their horses and burying themselves in the cool, damp earth to survive. It is a slow, quiet horror ending in surrender and silence. Meanwhile, the main body of Peter's army rests at a place called Sivetot, near the coast. Peter has gone back to Constantinople to beg for supplies, leaving his flock alone. On a bright October morning, a rumour spreads through the camp, a lie planted by Turkish spies, that the forward group has captured Nicaea and is looting it. Greed and excitement ripple through the tents. Ignoring their captains, the entire mob rushes out, a disorderly stampede, racing toward a city they will never reach. They pour into a narrow wooded valley, their voices loud, their guard down, and then the trap snaps shut. The arrows begin to fall like a sudden deadly rain. The Turkish archers are invisible in the trees, their aim precise. The battle, if it can be called that, is over in minutes. It is not a war, it is a harvesting. The People's Crusade dissolves in a cloud of dust and screams, the dreams of thousands ending on the hard, dry ground of Anatolia. Only a few survive, fleeing back to the coast where the Byzantine navy rescues them, pulling them from the water like shipwrecked sailors. We pull back now, retreating into the high, quiet air above the battlefield. The dust settles. The valley returns to silence, save for the wind whistling through the scrub. It is a sombre opening to our story, a lesson written in loss. It teaches us that faith alone is not a shield against steel, and that the road to Jerusalem demands more than just a willing heart. As the sun sets over the Bosphorus, casting long purple shadows over the water, the first wave of the crusade has broken. But the tide is still rising. Behind this tragic vanguard, the true storm is gathering. The princes are coming. The Iron Men, the Knights of War, are marching down the same roads, their armour clanking in a rhythm that sounds like a heartbeat. The tragedy of the peasants has cleared the stage for the warriors. The real war is about to begin. The silence that settled over the bone-dry valleys of Anatolia does not last long. If we listen closely to the wind blowing from the west, the sound changes. It is no longer the chaotic shuffling of peasant sandals or the squeaking wheels of farm carts. It is a heavier, deeper sound, a rhythmic thrumming that vibrates through the soles of the feet. It is the sound of iron. The winter of 1096 turns into spring, and the true power of Europe is finally arriving at the gates of the East. These are not the ragged mobs of Peter the Hermit. These are the princes, the warlords, the men whose names are woven into the tapestries of legend. They come in waves, distinct and formidable, like storm fronts converging on a single point. We float now above the golden walls of Constantinople, the greatest city in the world, a jewel set between two seas. To the rough knights riding in from the muddy forests of France and Germany, this city is a hallucination. They have never seen paved streets lit by oil lamps or domes that seem to float on halos of light. They stare up at the Hagia Sophia with mouths open, their breath fogging in the cool sea air, feeling suddenly small and very far from home. Inside the great palace, Emperor Alexios Komnenos sits on a throne that is a marvel of engineering, surrounded by mechanical golden lions that roar and birds made of bronze that sing. He is a man of immense intelligence and weary caution. He watches the horizon with a knot in his stomach. He asked for help, yes, but he expected mercenaries he could pay and dismiss. Instead, entire kingdoms are camping on his lawn. First comes Hugh of Vermandois, the brother of the King of France. He is a man of high birth and even higher self-regard, who manages to get shipwrecked on his way there and is fished out of the Adriatic Sea. He arrives not as a conqueror, but as a wet, shivering guest, yet he still demands a reception worthy of a conqueror. Alexios, ever the diplomat, dries him off, gives him gifts, and essentially places him under luxurious house arrest. It is a gentle power play, a reminder of who truly holds the keys to the pantry. Next comes Godfrey of Bouillon, the Duke of Lower Lorraine. Picture him, a tall, broad-shouldered man, with a beard the colour of straw and a reputation for quiet, unshakable piety. He does not come to loot, he comes to serve. But he brings with him a massive army, a walking city of steel that camps outside the walls, making the Byzantine citizens nervous. Tensions flare over food, always food, and for a brief, terrifying moment, skirmishes break out. Arrows fly over the sacred walls on Holy Thursday, a sacrilege that shocks both sides. Alexios realizes he is sitting on a powder keg. He cuts off their supplies, then offers them back with a smile, forcing Godfrey to come to the table. It is a dance of diplomacy played on a razor's edge. But the man Alexios fears most arrives next, Bohemond of Taranto. The very name sends a shiver through the Byzantine court. Bohemond is a Norman, a descendant of Vikings who settled in Italy, and he is a giant of a man, tall, fair, with eyes that miss nothing. Years ago he had tried to conquer the Byzantine Empire himself. He and Alexios had faced each other across battlefields. Now Bohemond arrives wearing a cross, claiming to be a friend. The tension in the throne room when they meet is thick enough to choke on. The courtiers hold their breath. Bohemond bows, Alexios nods. It is a masterclass in political theatre. Bohemond is charmed, or pretends to be, by the emperor's wealth, reportedly eyeing a room full of treasure and whispering, "If I had such wealth, I could conquer the world." Alexios, hearing this, promptly sends the entire room's contents to Bohemond's tent as a gift. It is a bribe, a thank you, and a warning, all wrapped in silk. The emperor has a plan. He knows he cannot command these men, so he decides to bind them. He demands an oath. He wants them to swear that any lands they conquer, lands that once belonged to Rome, must be returned to the empire. It is a reasonable request to a Byzantine, and an insult to a feudal lord who fights for his own glory. One by one, they are ushered into the magnificent throne room, dazzled by the gold and the incense, and one by one, they bend the knee. Some do it willingly, like Hugh. Some, like Bohemond, do it with a calculated smile, eyeing the crown he hopes to steal. But one man refuses, Raymond of Toulouse, the oldest and richest of the princes, a man with one eye and a stubborn streak as wide as the Rhone River. He says he will serve no earthly king, only God. It takes days of arguing, but he finally agrees to a compromise. He will not swear fealty, but he promises not to kill the emperor. In the world of high-stakes diplomacy, that counts as a win. Historians still debate the sincerity of these oaths. Did the Crusaders truly understand what they were promising, or did they view it as a mere formality, a toll to be paid for passage? To the Byzantines, the oath was a binding legal contract. To the knights, it was a ritual performed to get the ships moving. This misunderstanding is a hairline fracture in the foundation of the crusade, a crack that will widen with every mile they march east. But for now, the paper is signed, the hands are shaken, and the wine is poured. With the oath secured, Alexios wastes no time. He hurries the armies across the Bosphorus Strait. ferrying them from Europe to Asia before they can change their minds or eat his city bare. We watch from above as the great ships cut through the dark, swirling currents of the strait. The horses are blindfolded to keep them calm. The knights stand on the decks, looking back at the dome of the Hagia Sophia glowing in the twilight, and then turning their faces forward to the dark, hulking mountains of Asia Minor. They are leaving the known world. They are crossing the psychological threshold. Once they land on the Asian shore, the different armies, the French, the Normans, the Germans, the Flemish, begin to merge into a single, colossal entity. It is a terrifying sight. Tens of thousands of armoured men, a forest of lances, a sea of coloured banners snapping in the hot wind. They are no longer guests, they are an invasion. Their first target is Nicaea, the city that had mocked the peasant army just months before. This time, the Sultan, Kilij Arslan, is away fighting another rival, thinking the Crusaders are just another rabble of farmers he can crush at his leisure. He is making a fatal mistake. He does not know that the Iron Men have arrived. As the siege engines are built and the camps are struck, a strange harmony settles over the host. They are united by a common purpose and a common enemy. The bickering of the princes quiets down, replaced by the roar of the forge and the chant of the priest. We drift low over the camp at night. You can smell the roasting meat, the sweating horses, the oil used to polish the mail. You can hear the low murmur of prayers in a dozen dialects. They are afraid, certainly. They are human. But they are also electric with anticipation. They have passed the gate. The threshold is behind them. The Emperor Alexios stays behind in his golden city, watching the fires of their camp from across the water. He has saved his capital for now. He has pointed the weapon at his enemy and pulled the trigger. But as he watches the glow on the horizon, he must wonder if he has unleashed a force he can never truly control. The great pilgrimage has officially begun. The knights check their girths, sharpen their blades, and look toward the rising sun. The road to Jerusalem is long, but they have taken the first irreversible step. The diplomacy is over. The time for iron has come. The map of the world is not drawn in ink, but in endurance. We leave the sun-baked plains of Anatolia behind, drifting south and east, following the dust of the marching army as the year turns toward the grey, wet autumn of 1097. The landscape changes, growing steeper, the valleys narrowing into throats of stone, until suddenly the horizon is blocked by a shape so massive it seems like a geological mistake. We have arrived at Antioch. If Constantinople was a jewel, Antioch is a fortress, built by giants. Its walls cling to the sheer sides of Mount Silpius, snaking up and down the crags like a stone dragon, boasting 400 towers that look down upon the Orontes River with cold indifference to the Crusaders standing in the mud below. Looking up at those impossible ramparts, the dream of Jerusalem suddenly feels very far away. This is the gateway to the Holy Land, and it is locked tight. The siege begins, not with a bang, but with a slow, grinding suffocation. The Crusaders encircle the city, pitching their tents in the shadow of the walls, confident that God will shatter the stone. But God, it seems, is waiting. Autumn bleeds into winter, and the skies open up. It rains with a relentless, punishing misery that turns the camp into a swamp. The cold seeps into the bones of the knights, rusting their mail and rotting their boots. And then comes the silent enemy, the one that kills without a sword: hunger. The supplies run out. The local countryside is stripped bare. The great army, which had marched so proudly from Nicaea, begins to starve. It is a slow horror. We watch as the campfire conversations shift from glory to food. A donkey's head becomes a luxury item sold for a bag of silver. Men boil the leather of their shields to make a chewy, tasteless soup. The horses, those prize destriers, meant to carry knights into battle, are eaten one by one until the proud cavalry is reduced to walking in the mud. There is a dark, desperate humour in the camp, men joking that they have tightened their belts so much their spines are touching their navels. But the laughter is brittle. The famine is a physical weight, pressing down on the soul. Some knights, unable to bear the misery, sneak away in the night, lowering themselves down ropes to flee back to the coast. Even Peter the Hermit, the firebrand preacher, tries to run away, only to be dragged back in shame. It is the lowest point of the soul. The grandeur of the crusade is dissolving in the rain. Inside the city, the Turkish garrison watches and waits, well fed and secure, but they do not account for Bohemond of Taranto. The giant Norman has not been praying for walls to fall. He has been looking for a man who can be bought. He finds him in a tower captain named Firouz, a discontented armour maker who holds a grudge against his masters. In the dead of night, a deal is struck. Bohemond gathers the other princes and tells them he has a key, but he demands a price. If he takes the city, he keeps it. The other leaders, desperate and starving, agree. On a cloudy night in June 1098, a rope ladder is lowered from the Tower of the Two Sisters. In total silence, Bohemond and 60 hand-picked knights climb the sheer wall. We hold our breath as they ascend, the only sound the wind and the scuff of leather on stone. They reach the top. A signal flares. The gates are thrown open, and the Crusader army, fueled by months of rage and hunger, pours into the city like a flood. The sack of Antioch is brutal and chaotic, a release of pent-up agony. But the victory is a mirage. Just days after they capture the city, the horizon darkens. A massive Turkish relief army, led by the fearsome General Kerbiger of Mosul, arrives. The trap snaps shut. The besiegers are now the besieged. The Crusaders are trapped inside the very city they just conquered, with no food, little water, and an army 3 times their size, waiting outside. The despair that settles over Antioch is heavier than the stone walls. They have traded a wet hell for a dry tomb. Men sit in the streets, heads in their hands, waiting for the end. The clergy pray, but the heavens are silent. And then, in the depths of this hopelessness, a spark ignites. A peasant named Peter Bartholomew comes forward with a story that sounds like the fever dream of a starving man. He claims that Saint Andrew visited him in his sleep and told him that the Holy Lance, the very spear that pierced the side of Christ on the cross, is buried beneath the floor of the Cathedral of St. Peter in Antioch. It is an absurd claim. The lance is supposed to be in Constantinople, or maybe Rome, but desperation makes the mind open to strange possibilities. On June 15th, a strange scene unfolds. 12 men, including the skeptical Bishop Adhemar, gather in the cathedral. They dig for hours, hauling up buckets of dirt from a trench in the floor. The sun sets, the cathedral grows dark, lit only by flickering torches. They find nothing. Disappointment hangs heavy in the air. Then Peter Bartholomew himself jumps into the pit. He digs frantically with his bare hands, mumbling prayers. Suddenly, a metallic clink echoes off the stone. He pulls up a rusted, corroded shard of iron. "The lance!" the cry goes out. "The Holy Lance!" Historians still argue whether Peter had the piece of iron tucked in his tunic the whole time. A pious fraud designed to save the army from despair. Bishop Adhemar certainly suspects it. But to the starving soldiers outside, it does not matter. The news spreads like wildfire. God is with them. He has given them a sign. The psychological shift is instantaneous and profound. Men who were too weak to stand an hour ago are suddenly sharpening their swords, their eyes burning with a terrifying, ecstatic light. They are no longer starving men. They are the instruments of divine will. On June 28th, the impossible happens. The gates of Antioch open, and the Crusader army marches out to face Kerboga's vast host. They are ragged, many on foot because their horses are dead, their armour rusted and mismatched. But they march with an eerie, disciplined silence. In the front, carried high on a pole, is the Holy Lance. Kerboga, sitting in his tent playing chess, laughs when he hears they are coming out. He thinks it is a suicide mission. He waits too long to organise his lines, thinking he can crush them in one blow. But as the armies collide, something breaks in the Turkish ranks. The Crusaders fight with a ferocity that defies logic. They do not feel pain. They do not feel fatigue. Some chroniclers later write that a ghostly army of white knights, led by St. George himself, was seen riding down from the mountains to aid them. Whether it was angels or simply the sheer desperate madness of men who have nothing left to lose, the result is the same. Kerboga's army panics. The fear spreads. The great host crumbles and flees into the dust. The Crusaders stand on the field, victorious, surrounded by the spoils of the enemy camp, mounds of food, gold, and silk. They feast until they are sick. They have survived the impossible. Antioch is theirs. But the victory leaves a bitter aftertaste. The unity of the army is fractured. Bohemond locks the citadel and refuses to leave, claiming the city as his personal prize, breaking his oath to the emperor. The other princes bicker and stall. The army, now fed but frustrated, sits in Antioch for months, while the common soldiers look south, toward the road that leads out of the city, whispering the name of the destination that still eludes them. Jerusalem is waiting. But the sins of the leaders are beginning to weigh as heavily as their armour. The miracle of the lance saved their lives, but it could not save their souls from the greed that follows triumph. The road south from Antioch is paved with impatience. We drift high above the coastal plain, watching the seasons turn once more, the green of spring hardening into the brittle gold of a Levantine summer. It is now June, in the year 1019. The great army, once a chaotic river of humanity, has been distilled by suffering into a smaller, harder stream. The hangers-on are gone, the weak have perished or turned back. What remains is the core, a force of perhaps 12,000 knights and infantry who have walked off the map of their known world. They move with a terrifying singularity of purpose. They have ignored the bickering of their princes, who wanted to stay and rule in the north. The common soldiers simply threatened to burn the walls of the towns they captured if the march did not continue. They are drawn forward by a gravity that pulls at their very souls, a magnetic hum that grows louder with every mile. They are walking toward the centre of the world. On the 7th of June, the vanguard crests a ridge near the hill of Montjoie, and suddenly the breath leaves their bodies. There, shimmering in the heat haze like a mirage cut from white stone, are the walls of Jerusalem. It is a moment of pure, unadulterated rupture. Men who have hacked their way through armies and eaten the leather of their own boots fall to their knees in the dust, weeping uncontrollably. They kiss the dry earth. They are looking at the earthly reflection of heaven, the city where history began and where it will end. But as we float closer, lowering our gaze from the spiritual to the physical, we see the terrible reality of the situation. Jerusalem is not a city of clouds. It is a formidable fortress, surrounded by deep valleys on 3 sides and guarded by a Fatimid garrison that knows exactly what is coming. The governor, Iftikhar al-Dawla, has expelled all Christians from the city to prevent betrayal and has poisoned the wells outside the walls. The siege begins in a crucible of heat. The sun is a physical weight, a hammer that beats down on the iron helmets of the Franks. If Antioch, was a misery of rain and hunger. Jerusalem is a torture of thirst. The hills around the city are bare, stripped of trees, offering no shade. The springs are choked with dead animals. We watch as knights, men who own vast estates in the verdant valleys of France, scrabble in the mud of dried creek beds. Desperate for a cup of brown water, they sew together animal skins to carry water from miles away. But it arrives stinking and warm. It is a test of faith that feels designed by the devil himself. The city stands before them, cool and mocking behind its honey-coloured walls, while the besiegers slowly bake in the Judean wilderness. There is a dark absurdity to the logistics. To take a walled city, you need wood. Wood for ladders, wood for catapults, wood for great siege towers. But there are no forests here. It is a landscape of rock and scrub. The army is stalled, staring at the prize, but unable to touch it. Then a stroke of fortune, or perhaps providence, arrives. A Genoese fleet docks at the nearby port of Jaffa, bringing supplies, and, more importantly, skilled carpenters. They dismantle their own ships, cannibalizing the masts and hulls to build the engines of war. At the same time, a local Christian guides them to a hidden cave in the hills filled with seasoned timber. The sound of saws and hammers begins to echo through the valleys, a rhythmic industrial noise that disturbs the ancient silence. But the true preparation is not physical, it is spiritual. A vision spreads through the camp that they cannot take the city by force alone. They must circle it like Joshua at Jericho. And so, on a blistering July day, the entire army strips off their boots. We see them, a long, solemn procession of barefoot warriors and priests, walking slowly around the perimeter of the city walls. They carry crosses and relics, singing hymns that drift up into the hot, still air. On the ramparts above, the garrison watches, with a mixture of confusion and contempt. They shout insults, spitting on crosses they have hung over the walls. It is a surreal collision of worlds, a barefoot parade of penitents below, a jeering audience above, separated by stone and destiny. The Crusaders do not look up. They just walk, their feet bleeding on the sharp rocks, their minds fixed on a reality that only they can see. The assault begins on the night of July 13th. The darkness is torn apart by fire. We hover over the northern wall, where Godfrey of Bouillon and his brother Eustace have positioned a massive siege tower. It is a wooden skyscraper on wheels, covered in wet animal hides to protect it from incendiary arrows. Slowly, agonizingly, it begins to roll forward. Inside the city, the defenders work frantically, pouring boiling oil and throwing pots of Greek fire, a terrifying sticky substance that burns even on water, at the lumbering beast. The air is filled with the smell of roasting meat, sulphur, and burning pitch. For 2 days, the battle rages. It is a stalemate of grinding violence. Then, on the morning of July 15th, the wind shifts. The smoke that had been blinding the Crusaders is blown back into the faces of the defenders on the wall. Godfrey sees his chance. The tower creeps closer. A bridge of timber is lowered onto the ramparts. In a moment that has been frozen in art and song for 1,000 years, Godfrey is among the first to cross. He leaps onto the wall of Jerusalem, sword in hand. The defence shatters. The gate of St. Stephen is unbarred from the inside, and the Crusader army pours into the city like a dam breaking. What follows is the most difficult part of our story to tell. It is a descent into madness. The tension of 3 years of marching, starving, and dying is released in a single catastrophic explosion of violence. The Crusaders, convinced that they are the agents of God's wrath, lose all restraint. They sweep through the narrow, winding streets, killing everyone they find, men, women, and children, Muslim and Jew alike. The accounts of this day are apocalyptic. Chroniclers write of horses wading through blood up to their bridles, a river of red flowing through the Temple Mount. Historians still argue whether this image was a literal description or a biblical metaphor borrowed from the book of Revelation to signify the magnitude of the event. Likely, it was an exaggeration, but the truth is horrific enough. The slaughter is systematic and intimate. In the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where thousands had fled for sanctuary, the killing goes on for hours. It is a massacre that will stain the conscience of the West for centuries, a wound in the memory of the East that will never fully heal. And yet, in the midst of this horror, the strangest scene of all unfolds. As the sun sets, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red, the knights wash the gore from their hands, discard their armour, and walk to the church of the Holy Sepulchre. They fall to their knees before the tomb of Christ, weeping with a joy as intense as their violence. They sing hymns of thanksgiving, their voices cracking with emotion, believing they have fulfilled their ultimate duty. It is the supreme paradox of the Crusades, captured in a single hour. Men capable of supreme brutality and supreme piety, standing in a city they have liberated and desecrated in the same breath. Night falls over Jerusalem. The screaming has stopped. The only sound is the crackle of fires and the chanting of monks. The city is theirs, the goal is achieved, but the silence that settles over the holy city is heavy and suffocating. The air smells of copper and smoke. The Crusaders look at one another in the flickering light, survivors of a journey that has unmade and remade them. They are masters of the Holy Land, but they are strangers in it, a tiny island of Latin faith in a vast hostile sea. In the days that follow, they gather to choose a king. The obvious choice is Raymond of Toulouse, the richest and most powerful, but his arrogance has alienated the others. They turn to Godfrey of Bouillon, the man who led the assault. Godfrey accepts, but with a humility that becomes legendary. He refuses the title of king, saying he cannot wear a crown of gold in the city where his saviour wore a crown of thorns. Instead, he takes the title Advocatus Sancti Sepulchri, the defender of the Holy Sepulchre. It is a quiet, noble gesture to end a violent chapter. The kingdom of Jerusalem is born, not in triumph, but in a tentative, blood-soaked prayer. We pull back now, leaving the smoke to clear over the domes and towers. The first crusade is over. The impossible has been done. But as the knights sleep in the palaces of the vanished emirs, a new reality is dawning. Taking the city was the easy part. Holding it will take another 100 years of war. The shouting has stopped. The fires have burned down to grey circles of ash on the stones of Jerusalem, and the great army that stormed the walls has largely melted away. This is the part of the story that the songs often skip. The morning after the miracle. Once the vows were fulfilled and the prayers whispered at the Holy Sepulchre, the vast majority of the Crusaders did the only logical thing. They went home. They packed their rusted armour, took a souvenir palm frond, and boarded ships for France and Germany, eager to see the forests and families they had left behind 3 years ago. We float over the Kingdom of Jerusalem in the early years of the 12th century, and what we see is terrifyingly fragile. It is a kingdom of ghosts and gaps. The maps show a solid block of Christian territory, but the reality is a thin, porous web of occupied cities surrounded by a wilderness that is still very much hostile. The roads are quiet, dangerously so. Pilgrims still come, driven by the same piety that launched the crusade, but now they are walking through a land where bandits lurk behind every olive tree and lions. Yes, there were still lions in Judea then, prowl the Jordan Valley. The kingdom is a head without a body, a crown without a sword to defend it. Into this vacuum step two of the most fascinating and enigmatic creations of the Middle Ages, They rise not from the command of a king, but from the desperate needs of the road. The first begins in the smell of vinegar, sage, and sickness. In the Muristan district of Jerusalem, just a stone's throw from the Holy Sepulchre, there is a hospital. It was there before the Crusade, run by a group of Amalfitan merchants to care for sick pilgrims. Now, under the guidance of a man known as Blessed Gerard, it transforms. These are the Hospitallers, the Order of St. John. Initially, they are healers, men who wash the feet of the poor and bandage the wounds of the exhausted. They wear black robes with a simple white cross, moving like shadows through the wards. But in this harsh new world, charity requires steel. Slowly, the ladle is swapped for the lance. They realise that to save the pilgrim, you must first kill the bandit. They evolve into a military machine, building massive castles like Crac des Chevaliers, fortresses so complex and formidable that they remain standing today, silent giants of stone watching over the Syrian gaps. But it is the second group that captures the imagination of the world, then and now. In the year 1119, a French knight named Hugh of Paynes approaches King Baldwin II with a radical idea. He and 8 companions want to form a brotherhood dedicated solely to protecting pilgrims on the road from Jaffa to Jerusalem. They are poor, aggressively poor. They depend on alms for their food and clothes. They are so destitute that their official seal depicts 2 knights riding on a single horse, a poignant image of brotherhood that also looks, to the modern eye, a bit like a medieval budget cut. The king, desperate for any military help, grants them a headquarters in the wing of the royal palace on the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Crusaders believe this building stands on the ruins of the Temple of Solomon. And so, these 9 poor knights take a new name, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, the Templars. We drift down into the cool, subterranean vaults beneath the Temple Mount, known today as Solomon's Stables. It is here that the legend begins to gestate. The Templars are a paradox that the medieval mind struggles to comprehend. They are monks of war. They take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, just like a Benedictine in a quiet French monastery. But instead of farming or copying manuscripts, their daily office is the sword drill. They are forbidden to hunt, to gamble, or to wear flashy clothes. Their hair is cut short, but they grow long, shaggy beards, marking them apart from the clean-shaven norms of the West. They are the first institutionalized holy warriors, a concept that requires some heavy theological lifting to justify. Enter Bernard of Clairvaux, the Cistercian abbot and the most influential voice in Christendom. He is the Templars' greatest PR agent. He writes a treatise called In Praise of the New Knighthood, in which he performs a dazzling acrobatic feat of logic. He argues that when a Templar kills a non-Christian, it is not homicide, the killing of a man, but malicide, the killing of evil. It is a chilling distinction, one that strips the enemy of humanity and sanctifies the act of slaughter. With Bernard's blessing, the money and recruits pour in. The poor knights become the bankers of the world. This is one of the strange historical truths of the Templars. They essentially invent modern banking. A pilgrim in Paris can deposit a bag of gold at the Templar preceptory, receive a coded piece of parchment, a letter of credit, and travel to Jerusalem without fear of robbery. Once there, he hands the parchment to the Templar treasurer and receives his gold back, minus a small transaction fee. It is a system of multinational finance run by warrior monks who are personally forbidden from owning a coin. We watch as their vaults fill not just with swords, but with ledgers. They become the richest organisation in Europe, owning farms, vineyards, ships and ports. They are the iron spine of the Crusader states, a standing army that never disbands, never goes home, and never surrenders. But with secrecy comes suspicion. In the dim, torchlit stables beneath the mount, rumours begin to swirl. What are they doing down there? Historians and archaeologists still argue about the extent of the Templar excavations under the Temple Mount. Did they find something? Some say they were just clearing rubble to make room for their horses. Others, prone to the romance of conspiracy, whisper that they found the Ark of the Covenant, or the Holy Grail, or secret genealogies of Christ. While most scholars dismiss these as myths, the Templars' secrecy, their closed-door meetings, their strange initiation rituals, feeds the fire of legend. They become a state within a state, answerable only to the Pope, immune to the laws of kings. On the battlefield, they are terrifying. We see them forming up for a charge, their white mantles with the red cross snapping in the wind. They are strictly forbidden to retreat unless the odds are greater than 3-1. They ride in silence, contrasting with the chaotic shouting of other armies. When they charge, it is like a landslide. They are the shock troops of God, breaking the enemy lines with the sheer weight of their discipline. But their rigidity is also their weakness. They are often arrogant, dismissing the advice of local lords, eager to rush into battle to claim the crown of martyrdom. They are the heroes and the villains of their own story, saving the kingdom one day and imperiling it the next with their recklessness. As the mid-12th century approaches, the Holy Land has changed. It is no longer a frontier of loose adventure. It is a land of stone castles and silent orders. The Templars and Hospitallers have woven themselves into the landscape. They guard the mountain passes and the wells. They act as diplomats and bankers. They are the permanent garrison of the Latin East. But as we pull back from the Temple Mount, watching the white-clad knights drill in the dust, we can sense a shift in the air. The Muslim world, fractured and chaotic during the First Crusade, is beginning to heal its own wounds. The shock of the invasion is wearing off. New leaders are rising in the East, men who look at these warrior monks not with fear, but with a calculating determination. The Templars have built a wall of iron around the kingdom, but walls, no matter how strong, are made to be tested. The time of the easy raids is over. The counter-crusade is beginning to stir in the cities of Aleppo and Mosul, and it will bring a fire that even the killing of evil cannot extinguish. The wheel of fortune turns, heavy and creaking, as we leave the silent vigils of the warrior monks and drift back across the sea to the verdant, tapestried halls of Europe. It is the mid-12th century, and the world has changed. The generation that conquered Jerusalem is gone, buried in the crypts of history, and their sons and grandsons now sit on the thrones of the West. But in the year 1104, a tremor runs through the floorboards of Christendom. Far away in the dust of Mesopotamia, the city of Edessa, the first Crusader state to be established, becomes the first to fall. The warlord Zengi, a man of ruthless efficiency, smashes its walls and reclaims it for Islam. The news hits Europe not just as a military defeat, but as a theological shock. How could God allow his work to be undone? The answer, according to the fiery preachers of the day, is sin. The people have grown complacent. A new sacrifice is needed. And so, the machinery of holy war is cranked into motion once again, but this time the gears grind with a different sound. The First Crusade was a movement of desperate princes and starving peasants. The Second Crusade is the Crusade of Kings. It is a pageant of high romance, gilded armour, and disastrous hubris. At the centre of this glittering storm stands a woman who eclipses every man around her, Eleanor of Aquitaine. She is the Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right, the Queen of France by marriage, and arguably the most powerful person in Europe. Close your eyes and picture her. She is young, barely in her 20s, with a mind as sharp as a dagger and a spirit that refuses to be contained by the drab piety of her husband, King Louis VII. Louis is a man who seems to have stumbled onto the throne by mistake. He was raised to be a monk, and he rules with a rosary in one hand and a deep perpetual sense of guilt in the other. Eleanor, by contrast, is the summer sun, cultured, wealthy, and dangerously charismatic. When the call for the crusade comes, preached once again by the magnetic Bernard of Clairvaux at Vézelay, it is a spectacle of pure theatre. A wooden platform is built in a field to hold the royals, and when Louis and Eleanor step onto it to take the cross, the structure actually creaks and groans under the weight of the nobility pressing in. It is said that Bernard ran out of cloth crosses to give to the crowd and had to cut up his own underwear to make more, a detail that adds a touch of earthy humour to a moment of high solemnity. Eleanor does not intend to sit in a tower and knit while her husband goes to war. She announces she is coming, and she is bringing her ladies, her troubadours, and her entire court. The myths surrounding her departure are delicious and persistent. Later chroniclers, scandalised by her independence, would whisper that she and her ladies rode out of Paris dressed as Amazon warriors, bare-breasted and carrying lances. Historians shake their heads at this. It is almost certainly a fantasy of the male imagination, but the truth is hardly less striking. She rides astride, not side-saddle, dressed in the finest silks, leading a baggage train that stretches for miles, filled with wine, changes of clothes, and the comforts of home. It is a carnival moving to war. But the road to the east has no patience for pageantry. As the massive armies of Louis VII and the German Emperor Conrad III lumber across Europe, the cracks begin to show. This is not a unified force, it is a traffic jam of egos. The Germans go first, and are promptly mauled by the Turks in Anatolia, tricked by false guides and thirst. When the French arrive, they find the remnants of the German army, broken and bleeding. The reality of the crusade begins to sink in. The royal tour is over. The nightmare has begun. The journey through the mountains of southern Turkey near Mount Cadmus becomes a scene of horror. The French army is strung out along a narrow, winding pass, a snake of metal and flesh vulnerable to the hawk. Eleanor and the vanguard, perhaps moving too fast, or perhaps simply unaware of the terrain, get too far ahead of the main body. The baggage train, heavy with the Queen's luxuries, clogs the narrow track. The Turks seize the moment. They swoop down from the heights, cutting the army in half. The confusion is absolute. Boulders crash down onto the knights. Arrows rain from invisible archers. King Louis, separated from his bodyguards, is forced to fight for his life alone. There is a vivid, almost cinematic account of the King of France hauling himself up into the branches of a tree, or perhaps onto a large rock, depending on which chronicler you believe, and hacking away at the Turks with his sword, his royal spurs flashing in the chaos. He survives only because the enemy does not recognize him in the twilight. The massacre is a humiliation. The army that limps into Antioch is not a conquering host, but a group of traumatized survivors. But in Antioch, the atmosphere shifts from tragedy to scandal. The ruler of Antioch is Raymond of Poitiers, Eleanor's uncle. He is handsome, charming, and everything Louis is not. He welcomes his niece with open arms, and the two of them spend long days together in the lush gardens of the city, speaking the dialect of the south, laughing at inside jokes and ignoring the sulking king. The court buzzes with rumours. Is the relationship inappropriate? Historians still argue about the true nature of their bond. Was it an affair, or simply a woman happy to find a kindred spirit in a strange land? Whatever the truth, the political damage is real. Raymond wants the army to attack Aleppo, a sensible strategic goal. Louis, driven by jealousy and a stubborn desire to finish his pilgrimage, refuses. He drags Eleanor, essentially against her will, south to Jerusalem. The rift between the royal couple is now a chasm. The crusade has broken their marriage. When they finally reach Jerusalem, the Great Council of Acre is convened to decide the target of the war. It is a glittering assembly of the greatest powers in Christendom: King Louis, Emperor Conrad, and King Baldwin III of Jerusalem. And here they make a decision that remains one of the most baffling strategic blunders in military history. Instead of attacking the vulnerable Zengi in the north or securing the borders of Edessa, they decide to attack Damascus. Damascus is the only Muslim city that is actually an ally of the Crusader kingdom, a buffer against the rising power of the Zengids. To attack it is to drive their only friend into the arms of their enemy. It is madness, driven by greed and the desire for a quick, prestigious victory. The siege of Damascus in July 1148 is a farce that turns into a tragedy. The Crusaders initially attack from the west, moving through the Ghouta, the lush orchards that surround the city. It is a nightmare of guerrilla warfare. The trees and mud walls of the orchards provide cover for the defenders, who snipe at the knights from behind every trunk. The Crusaders push through inch by bloody inch until they reach the river. The city is on the verge of panic, but then inexplicable orders are given. The commanders decide to move the army to the eastern side of the city, claiming the walls are weaker there. They abandon the water, the shade, and the cover of the orchards for the open, scorching plain on the other side. It is a death sentence. The eastern walls are strong, and there is no water. The sun beats down on the armour of the kings. The defenders of Damascus, realising the Crusaders have blundered, simply lock the gates and wait. Reinforcements are coming from the north. Panic sets in among the Christian ranks. Whispers of bribery circulate. Did the locals pay the commanders to move, or was it just sheer incompetence? After only 4 days on the new side, with their throats parched and their morale shattered, the kings of Europe order a retreat. They strike their tents and walk away, leaving the city untouched. The Second Crusade, launched with the thunder of popes and the wealth of nations, ends with a whimper in the dust of a Syrian plain. The journey home is a silent one. Louis and Eleanor return on separate ships, their union effectively over. The failure hangs over Europe like a shroud. Saint Bernard, the man who promised them victory, is crushed, blaming the sins of the soldiers for the disaster. But the consequences are far deeper than a bruised ego. The myth of Crusader invincibility is shattered. The Muslim world sees that the kings of the West can be beaten, that they are divided and foolish. The attack on Damascus forces the city to unite with the Zengids, paving the way for a unified Islamic superstate. The Crusaders have effectively created the weapon that will eventually destroy them. As we watch the ships disappear over the western horizon, leaving the Holy Land more vulnerable than ever, we feel the weight of the coming storm. The age of the erratic, bickering warlords is ending. A new figure is rising in the east, a man who will not make the mistakes of his predecessors. The stage is cleared of the clowns and the kings. It is time for the Sultan. The dust from the failed Second Crusade settles into the cracks of the desert floor, and a strange, heavy quiet descends upon the kingdom of Jerusalem. It is the silence of a held breath. The generation of the great conquerors is dead, and the generation of the failed kings has retreated into bitterness. In this interim, history gives us a tragic, symmetrical pairing. Two men who will circle each other like sun and moon, defining the fate of the Holy Land not just by their swords, but by their characters. We drift now into the cool, stone corridors of the royal palace in Jerusalem, sometime in the 1160s. The air smells of beeswax candles and dried lavender, scents used to mask the underlying odour of sickness. In a sunlit courtyard, a group of noble children are playing. They are roughhousing, pinching and scratching each other as children do, shrieking when they feel pain. But one boy, a golden-haired prince of 9 years old, does not cry out. He does not flinch. His tutor, the historian William of Tyre, watches with a growing cold dread in the pit of his stomach. He approaches the boy, Prince Baldwin, and tests his arm. Nothing. The flesh is numb. It is the first whisper of a curse that will consume him. Leprosy. In any other family, in any other time, the boy would be cast out. Bells tied to his ankles to warn the healthy of his approach, declared legally dead by the church. But this is Jerusalem, a kingdom desperate for bloodlines, and Baldwin is the heir. The court makes a terrifying choice. They will crown a leper. They will hide the rot under silk and steel and pretend that the king is whole. As Baldwin IV grows, the disease devours him. It is a slow, cruel erosion. We see him as a teenager, his face beginning to lose its sensation, his hands curling into claws. Hollywood and romance novels often depict him wearing a polished silver mask to hide his disfigurement, a dramatic image that has become inseparable from his legend. However, historians still argue whether such a mask ever existed. There is no contemporary evidence for it, and it is more likely he wore veils, or simply allowed his subjects to see the ruin of his face, a display of raw, sacrificial courage that perhaps commanded even more respect than silver. Imagine the scene: a king who cannot hold his own reins, who must be lifted onto his horse, yet who insists on riding at the head of his army. He is a living memento mori, a king who is rotting while he breathes, yet his mind is as sharp and clear as a diamond. He understands the precariousness of his kingdom better than any healthy man. He knows that time is his enemy, not just because of the bacteria in his blood, but because of the shadow rising in the south. That shadow is Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known to the West simply as Saladin. If Baldwin is the tragic hero, Saladin is the philosopher king. Born a Kurd in a world dominated by Turks and Arabs, he rises through the ranks not just by violence, but by a genius for unity. We float over Cairo, where Saladin has taken control of Egypt, ending the Fatimid Caliphate. Then we drift to Damascus, which opens its gates to him. He has done what no Muslim leader before him could manage. He has unified Egypt and Syria. The Crusader states are no longer a wedge driving the Islamic world apart. They are an island surrounded by a rising tide. Saladin is a man of culture, generous to a fault. He often gives away so much treasure that his treasurers have to hide gold from him just to keep the army paid. He is the mirror image of the leper king, healthy, vibrant, surrounded by sons, and patient. He calls for jihad, but he plays the long game, tightening the noose around Jerusalem slowly, respectfully. The collision comes in 1177 at a place called Montgisard. It is a moment that defies all military logic. Saladin, confident in his overwhelming numbers, perhaps 26,000 men, marches on Jerusalem, assuming the leper boy is too weak to stop him. His army spreads out to pillage, careless and relaxed, but Baldwin, 16 years old and burning with fever, summons a desperate courage. He scrapes together a few hundred knights and marches out to meet the flood. We see the young king, bandaged and fragile, ordering the true cross to be brought to the front. He dismounts, or falls, from his horse and prostrates himself in the dust before the relic, weeping so piteously for the salvation of his kingdom that his hardened knights burst into tears alongside him. Then they remount. The charge of the leper king is a thing of terrifying beauty. They catch Saladin's army completely off guard. The Crusaders smash into the disordered lines like a hammer into glass. The great Sultan, the master of the East, is nearly captured. He barely escapes, fleeing into the desert night on a racing camel, a somewhat undignified exit for the greatest conqueror of the age, but one that proves he is, after all, only human. Montgisard is a miracle, but it is a sunset miracle. It buys the kingdom time, but it cannot buy Baldwin his health. The disease accelerates, he goes blind, he loses the use of his hands and feet. The court becomes a snake pit of succession crises. Baldwin has no children, so the future rests on his sisters. The vultures begin to circle, ambitious men seeking to marry into the royal line. Enter Guy of Lusignan, a handsome, vapid French knight who marries Baldwin's sister Sibylla. Baldwin despises Guy, seeing him for what he is, a man of weak character and poor judgment. There is a heartbreaking scene in the final years of the reign, where the dying king tries to dissolve the marriage, to save his kingdom from the fool who is about to inherit it, but the politics are too tangled, the factions too entrenched, the king is rotting, and so is the state. The loyalty that held the kingdom together is decomposing, along with Baldwin's body. Outside the walls, Saladin rebuilds. He learns from Montgisard. He will not underestimate the Franks again. He gathers his strength, waiting for the inevitable. The relationship between Baldwin and Saladin is one of distant, profound respect. It is said that Saladin even sent his own personal physicians to treat the king, a gesture of chivalry that seems impossible in modern warfare, but fits perfectly in this strange twilight era. They are enemies who understand each other better than they understand their own allies. Saladin knows he does not need to storm the walls while Baldwin lives. He only needs to wait for the candle to gutter out. And finally, in 1185, it does. Baldwin the Foulful dies at the age of 24. He has outlived every prognosis, fought off the superpower of the Middle East, and held his kingdom together by the sheer force of his will. But as they lower his light, wasted body into the tomb, beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, a heavy finality settles over Jerusalem. The shield is gone. The leper who guarded the holy city has left the watch. Above ground, Guy of Lusignan puts on the crown, and in the desert, Saladin mounts his horse. The time for miracles is over. The time for reckoning has arrived. The wind blowing from the desert is hot and dry, and it smells of iron. The tragedy of the leper king is not that he died, but that he left us alone with the fools. The death of the leper king breaks the dam. With Baldwin in his tomb, the restraint that held the kingdom together evaporates, leaving behind a noxious cloud of ambition and stupidity. We drift now to the desert fortress of Kerak, perched high above the Dead Sea. It is the lair of Reynold of Chatillon, a man who might just be the greatest villain in the history of the Crusades. He is a rogue knight, a violent opportunist who views treaties as suggestions and peace as a boring interlude between looting sprees. While Saladin observes the truce he signed with the leper king, Reynold grows restless. In the winter of 1186, he spots a massive caravan moving north from Cairo to Damascus, rich with spices, gold, and unarmed pilgrims. It is too tempting. Reynold swoops down like a hawk, slaughtering the guards, chaining the merchants, and stealing the wealth. Rumours fly that Saladin's own sister was in that caravan. Historians still argue whether she was actually there, or if this was a propaganda masterstroke by Saladin to whip his troops into a frenzy, but the result is the same. Saladin swears a solemn oath. He will kill Reynold with his own hands. The truce is dead. The war is on. Saladin moves with terrifying precision. He crosses the Jordan River and lays siege to the town of Tiberias, trapping the wife of Count Raymond of Tripoli inside. It is a classic bait and switch. He does not want the town, he wants the army. He wants to draw the Crusaders out of their well-watered springs near Sapphira and into the baking oven of the Galilean plateau. The leaders of the kingdom gather in a frantic council. Raymond of Tripoli, whose own wife is the one in danger, stands up and begs King Guy not to march. "Let him take Tiberias," he argues. "I would rather lose my city and my wife than lose the kingdom." It is the voice of sanity, of hard-won experience. But King Guy is weak, and he is whispered to by the Templar Grand Master Gerard de Riedfort, a man blinded by hatred and pride. "Are you a coward?" they taunt. "Do you leave Christian women to the infidel?" The taunts work. Guy, fearful of looking weak, orders the march. He signs the death warrant of his kingdom. On July 3rd, 1187, the army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem leaves the springs of Sapphira. It is the largest army the Crusaders have ever assembled, 20,000 men. The true cross carried in their midst like a golden ark. But the moment they step onto the plateau, the sun attacks them. It is July in the Galilee. The heat radiates from the ground, turning the air into a shimmering curtain of misery. They are marching toward Tiberias, but Saladin's army is between them and the water. The Turkish light cavalry, swift as swallows, swarm around the plodding column. They do not charge, they harass. They fire arrows into the mass of men and horses, then wheel away. But their greatest weapon is the environment. They empty the water jars along the route. The Crusaders are walking into a furnace. By afternoon, the thirst is a physical agony. Tongues swell in mouths, lips crack and bleed. Men begin to drink their own urine or the blood of their dying horses. The army slows to a crawl, a wounded beast stumbling in the dust. They cannot reach the water at the Sea of Galilee, tantalizingly visible in the distance below, because Saladin's wall of steel blocks the way. Guy orders a halt. They camp on a twin-peaked hill known as the Horns of Hattin. It is a dry camp. No water, no wells, just the hot wind and the sound of the enemy chanting in the darkness. That night, Saladin plays his psychological masterpiece. He orders his men to bring up bundles of dry scrub and brushwood. They surround the Crusader camp and set the brush on fire. The smoke, thick and acrid, rolls up the hill, choking the parched nights. It is a vision of hell. Surrounded by fire, dying of thirst, listening to the enemy pour out water onto the sand just to mock them. The Crusaders do not sleep. They pray, they weep, and they wait for the end. When the sun rises on July 4th, it brings no relief, only the revelation of their doom. The army is surrounded. The battle that follows is less a contest of tactics than a slaughter of the exhausted. The infantry, maddened by thirst, abandons the knights and surges toward the lake, only to be cut down or captured. The knights, encased in hot steel, fight with the desperation of the damned. They charge again and again, trying to break the ring of fire and iron, but the horses collapse and the arms grow heavy. The unthinkable happens. The true cross, the sacred talisman that had led them to victory for 80 years, is captured. The sight of the golden cross held upside down by Muslim soldiers breaks the heart of the army. King Guy's red tent is overrun. The King of Jerusalem is a prisoner. The silence returns to the Horns of Hattin, broken only by the groans of the dying and the scavengers picking through the bodies. But the drama is not over. In his victory tent, cool and shaded, Saladin receives the captive leaders. King Guy is brought in, trembling with thirst and terror. Saladin, ever the gracious host, hands him a goblet of water cooled with snow from Mount Hermon. It is a gesture of hospitality that, in Arab custom, means the prisoner's life is safe. Guy drinks greedily, the cool liquid a shock to his system. Then he hands the cup to Reynold of Chatillon, who is standing beside him, defiant and sneering. Saladin freezes. His eyes go cold. "I did not give this man water," he says to the interpreter. "The bond of hospitality does not extend to the wolf." Saladin stands, draws his scimitar, and in a moment of brutal fulfillment of his vow, strikes Reynaud down. The guards finish the job. King Guy, watching his companion beheaded, falls to his knees, thinking he is next, but Saladin helps him up, his voice returning to a calm, reassuring tone. "A king does not kill a king," he says, "but that man was a monster, not a king." The Battle of Hattin is absolute. In one day, the military power of the Crusader states has been erased. There is no one left to defend the castles, there is no one left to guard the walls. Saladin sweeps through the kingdom like a tidal wave. Acre falls, Ascalon falls, Nablus, Jaffa, Beirut. They all open their gates. The only resistance comes from a few isolated garrisons. The map is being repainted green, the colour of Islam. And finally, inevitability arrives at the gates of Jerusalem itself. The holy city is filled with refugees, women and children, but almost no soldiers. Leading the defence is Balian of Ibelin, a nobleman who had escaped Hattin and asked Saladin for safe conduct to Jerusalem to fetch his wife. Saladin granted it, on the condition he stay only one night and not fight. But when Balian arrived, the people begged him to lead them. He wrote to Saladin, apologising for breaking his word. Saladin, with a chivalry that seems almost mythical, wrote back, "I understand. Do your duty." Balian knights, every teenage boy in the city, trying to create a phantom army. They hold out for weeks, fighting on the walls with desperate courage, but there is no hope of rescue. Saladin's sappers mine the walls. A breach is made. Balian rides out to negotiate. He plays a final, desperate card. He tells Saladin that if the Muslims do not grant safe passage to the Christians, the defenders will kill every hostage, destroy the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and burn the city to the ground before dying in the flames. "We will leave you nothing but a pile of stones," he warns. Saladin looks at the man, sees the resolve in his eyes, and agrees. He does not want a massacre. He wants the city. A ransom is set. Those who can pay can leave. Those who cannot will be enslaved. But even then, Saladin and his brother release thousands of the poor for free, an act of mercy that stands in stark contrast to the bloodbath of the First Crusade. On October 2nd, 1187, the anniversary of the Prophet's night journey, Saladin enters Jerusalem. The cross on the Dome of the Rock is taken down, dragged through the streets, and beaten with clubs. The call to prayer, the Adhan, rings out from the minarets for the first time in 88 years. The kingdom of heaven has fallen back to earth. The lamps in the holy sepulchre flicker, but they do not go out. The Christians are gone, but the story is not over. The shockwave of this loss is already travelling across the sea, racing toward the courts of Europe. The sleeping lions are waking up. The news of Jerusalem's fall does not travel to Europe. It haunts it. It moves like a phantom across the Mediterranean, carried on ships with sails painted black, whispering the catastrophe from port to port. When the Archbishop of Tyre arrives in the courts of the West, his clothes torn and his face grey with exhaustion, the shock is physical. Pope Urban III, upon hearing that the holy city is lost, is said to have died of a heart attack instantly. It is likely a legend, a dramatic embellishment by later chroniclers, but it speaks to the emotional crater left by the news. The West is not just angry, it is terrified. The victory of the First Crusade had been their proof that God was on their side. If Jerusalem is gone, has God turned his back? The answer, as always, is penance. But this time, penance is not enough. This time, the world demands a reckoning. And so, the sleeping giants stir. The Third Crusade is not a movement of scrappy adventurers or second sons. It is the crusade of the Titans. The three most powerful men in the Western world rise from their thrones, casting shadows that stretch across the map. They are the Avengers, of the Middle Ages, a collection of egos and armies so vast that the ground trembles when they gather. First, there is Frederick I, known as Barbarossa, Redbeard. He is the Holy Roman Emperor, the King of Germany and Italy, a man carved from the old oak of the north. He is nearly 70 years old, ancient for a medieval warrior, but he possesses a vitality that terrifies men half his age. He has spent his life fighting popes and princes, forging an empire of iron. He does not need to go. He has nothing left to prove. But the call of the East is a siren song he cannot resist. He gathers an army that makes the ground groan, perhaps 100,000 men, including 20,000 knights. It is the largest crusader force ever assembled. When they march, they drink rivers dry. Then there is Philip II of France, a man of a different mettle. He is young, barely 25, with a mind like a trap. He is not a warrior poet. He is a politician, a schemer, a man who watches the chessboard while others are sharpening their swords. He is known as Augustus, the Increaser, for he is slowly, methodically rebuilding the power of the French crown. He goes to the crusade not out of burning piety, but because he cannot let his rivals outshine him. He is the ice to the fire of the man who stands beside him. That man is Richard Plantagenet, Richard the Lionheart. He is the King of England, though he barely speaks English, and spends almost no time there. He is a creature of war, a man who is only truly alive when he is in the saddle. He is tall, handsome, volatile, and gifted with a military genius that borders on the supernatural. He is a poet who writes songs of chivalry and a butcher who executes prisoners without blinking. He bankrupts England to pay for his army, famously quipping, "I would sell London itself if I could find a buyer." To him, the crusade is the ultimate tournament, the grandest stage on earth. But armies run on gold, not just glory. To fund this massive expedition, a new horror is unleashed upon the populace of Europe, the Saladin tithe. It is a tax of 10% on all movable goods and revenues. It is arguably the first true income tax in European history, a grim innovation that outlasts the war itself. The collection is ruthless. Those who pay are given an indulgence. Those who refuse are threatened with excommunication. The crusade begins not with a prayer, but with an audit. The great movement begins. Barbarossa, being the oldest and the grandest, goes first. He refuses to take the sea route, trusting in the strength of his boots. He marches his colossal army overland, retracing the steps of the First Crusade. But where the first pilgrims were a chaotic mob, Barbarossa's army is a machine. They smash through the Balkans, terrifying the Byzantines. The emperor in Constantinople, fearful of this German giant, tries to slow him down, but Barbarossa simply threatens to sack the city. He crosses the Dardanelles into Asia Minor and begins to chew through the Turkish armies. At the Battle of Iconium, the old emperor charges the enemy lines himself, shouting, "Why do you delay? Christ reigns! Christ conquers!" The Turks are scattered. The road to the Holy Land is open. Saladin, hearing reports of this unstoppable red-bearded juggernaut approaching from the north, is genuinely afraid. He knows he cannot stop the Germans. But history turns on the smallest of hinges. It is June 1190. The German army is marching through the heat of southern Turkey. They reach the Salif River. The water is cold, rushing from the mountains, attempting relief from the baking sun. What happens next is a scene that has baffled historians for 8 centuries. The emperor, hot and impatient, decides to cross the river. Some say he tried to swim, others say his horse slipped. But in a matter of moments, the ruler of the Holy Roman Empire, the most powerful man in Christendom, is gone. He drowns in waist-deep water. The anticlimax is shattering. Was it the weight of his armour? A heart attack brought on by the shock of the cold water? or simply the frailty of an old man pushing himself too hard? We will never know, but the effect is immediate. The massive army, which had defeated every enemy in its path, is defeated by a river. Leaderless, demoralized, and stricken with grief, the German host dissolves. Thousands turn back, others die of disease. Only a small weeping fraction carries the emperor's body, pickled in vinegar to preserve it, to the Holy Land. They arrive not as conquerors, but as mourners. Saladin breathes a sigh of relief that must have shaken the tent poles. The greatest threat is gone. Now the stage is left to the rivals. Philip and Richard take the sea route. They meet in Sicily, and the tension between them is already thick enough to cut. They are allies by necessity, enemies by nature. They bicker over etiquette, over money, over who walks into the room first. The winter storms keep them trapped in the Mediterranean, delaying their arrival, while the situation in the east grows desperate. We drift ahead of the royal fleets to the coast of the Holy Land. The focus of the war has shifted. It is no longer about Jerusalem, it is about Acre. This port city is the key to the coast, and a ragtag crusader army, led by the released King Guy, who has bounced back from his captivity with annoying persistence, is besieging it. But Saladin's army is besieging the besiegers. It is a double donut of war, the city, surrounded by crusaders, surrounded by Saladin. They have been stuck there for 2 years. The camp is a stinking, disease-ridden hellhole. The dead are piled in the trenches. Then, on a bright day in the spring of 1191, the horizon changes. The sails appear. First Philip, then Richard. The English fleet is a spectacle of wealth and power, the ships painted with red crosses, the decks crowded with knights in shining mail. When Richard lands, he does not just step onto the beach, he explodes onto it. He is carried on a litter, sick with a terrible illness called arnaldia, a form of scurvy or trench mouth. But even from his sick bed, he takes command. He offers gold coins for every stone pulled from the city walls. He builds massive catapults with names like Bad Neighbour and God's Own Sling. The arrival of the kings electrifies the siege. The stalemate is broken by the sheer force of their presence. The pounding of the walls intensifies. Saladin, watching from the hills, knows that the equation has changed. The lions have arrived. The German giant may have fallen, but the English predator is here, and he is hungry. The third act of our tragedy has begun, and it will be played out on the narrow strip of sand between the walls of Acre and the sea. The diplomacy is over. The time for the duel of the century is here. The surrender of Acre on July 12th, 1191, is not the end of the storm, it is merely the eye. The city gates open, and the banners of the two kings, the lilies of France and the lions of England, are raised over the battered walls. But inside the victor's camp, the air is sour with rivalry. Philip of France, pleading illness and tiring of Richard's arrogance, decides he has had enough. He packs his bags. He claims he must return to Europe to settle the succession of Flanders, but everyone knows the truth. He cannot bear to be the second son in Richard's sky. He sails home, leaving the Lionheart as the undisputed master of the crusade. Richard is now the sole protagonist of the West, a role he was born to play, but he is also alone. The responsibility for the entire war now rests on his broad, restless shoulders. And almost immediately, the darkness of that responsibility descends. We witness now the darkest stain on Richard's legend, a moment that history struggles to forgive. Negotiations with Saladin over the exchange of prisoners stall. Richard, impatient and needing to move his army south, makes a cold, brutal calculation. On a hill called Ayadia, in full view, of the Muslim outposts, he orders 2,700 Muslim prisoners, men who had surrendered in good faith, to be executed. The swords fall for hours. It is a massacre of terrifying efficiency. Saladin, watching from the distance, is overcome with grief and rage. The chivalrous mask slips. The war becomes primal. The message is clear. The new king is not interested in the polite dances of diplomacy. He is here to finish it. Richard turns his back on the carnage and looks south. His goal is Jaffa, the vital port that will supply the attack on Jerusalem. The march that follows is a masterclass in military discipline. We hover over the coastline, watching a sight that looks less like an army and more like a moving fortress. The Crusaders march close to the sea, allowing the fleet to sail alongside them, providing supplies and protecting their right flank. On their left, the exposed desert flank, Richard places the Templars and Hospitallers, the iron men who can take a beating without breaking. It is a slow, grinding procession. Saladin's army shadows them the entire way, a parallel river of steel flowing through the scrub. The Turkish archers ride close, firing storms of arrows into the Crusader ranks. The chroniclers tell us that the armour of the Christian knights is so thick that some men march with 10 or 20 arrows sticking out of their chainmail, looking like angry porcupines. Yet they do not break step. It is a test of nerves. Richard's orders are absolute. Do not charge. They must hold the line. They must let the enemy exhaust himself against the wall of discipline. But every dam has a breaking point. On September 7th, near the gardens of Arsuf, the pressure becomes unbearable. The heat is stifling, the dust choking. Saladin throws everything he has at the rear guard, trying to goad the Hospitallers into breaking formation. The Grand Master of the Hospitallers rides to Richard, begging permission to charge. "My lord, we are pressed too hard," he shouts. Richard tells him to wait. The arrows fall like hail. Finally, instinct overrides order. 2 knights break ranks shouting, "St. George," and the entire Hospitaller line follows them. The dam bursts. For a second, disaster looms. A disordered charge is exactly what Saladin wants. But Richard, seeing the mistake, reacts with lightning speed. He does not try to stop them. He spurs his horse and leads the charge himself, transforming a blunder into a thunderbolt. The Crusader heavy cavalry crashes into the lighter Muslim lines with the force of a collapsing mountain. The result is catastrophic for Saladin. His army is scattered. He rallies them, but the myth of his invincibility, rebuilt carefully after Montgisard, is cracked once more. The Lionheart is real, and he is unstoppable. The road to Jaffa is open. The Crusaders rebuild the city, and then finally turn inland. They march toward Jerusalem. They get close, agonizingly close. By Christmas, they are at Beit Nuba, just 12 miles from the holy city. The soldiers can likely see the glow of the city's lamps against the night sky. They weep with anticipation. But here, Richard halts. He calls a council. He looks at the maps, at the supply lines, at the winter mud that is sucking the boots off his men. He realizes a terrible truth. He can take Jerusalem, but he cannot hold it. Once the army goes home, the city will fall again. It is a moment of supreme strategic maturity and supreme emotional failure. He orders a retreat. The army is heartbroken. It is said that Richard pulled his surcoat over his head, refusing to even look at the city he had come so far to save, shouting that he was unworthy to see what he could not protect. The war settles into a strange, violent intimacy. Richard and Saladin, though they never meet face to face, develop a relationship that feels more like a courtship than a conflict. They exchange gifts. When Richard falls ill with fever, Saladin sends him fresh fruit and snow from the mountains to cool his drinks, a gesture of hospitality that baffles the modern mind but perfectly fits the code of the East, When Richard's horse is killed in battle, Saladin sends him 2 fresh stallions, remarking that it is not fitting for a king to fight on foot. They are the only 2 men on earth who truly understand the burden the other is carrying. They are frenemies, in the grandest sense, 2 titans weary of the pygmies around them. But the war is draining them both. Richard's health is failing, and news from England is bad. His brother John is usurping the throne. Saladin's emirs are tired, their treasuries empty. The end comes not with a bang, but with a piece of parchment. In September 1192, the Treaty of Jaffa is signed. It is a compromise that leaves everyone equally unhappy, which usually means it is a good treaty. The Crusaders keep the coast, a long strip of land from Tyre to Jaffa. Jerusalem remains in Muslim hands. But, and this is the crucial concession, Christian pilgrims are allowed to visit the city freely and without tax. The war ends where it began, with the rite of pilgrimage. It is a victory for peace, if not for conquest. Richard prepares to leave. He is the last to go, lingering on the dock, as if he cannot bear to close the book. He sends a final message to Saladin, boasting that he will return in 3 years to conquer the land. Saladin replies with characteristic grace that if he must lose his land to any king, he would rather lose it to Richard than any other. It is the perfect closing line to their duet. On October 9th, 1192, Richard sails away. He will never return. He will die 7 years later in a minor siege in France, shot by a cook with a crossbow, an absurd end for a demigod. Saladin does not survive him long. Exhausted by decades of war, the great Sultan dies in Damascus just months after Richard leaves, in March 1193. When he dies, his servants find that he has given away every coin in his treasury to the poor. There is not even enough money left to pay for his funeral. He is buried in a simple wooden coffin, a final testament to his piety. The 2 giants leave the stage almost simultaneously, leaving a vacuum that no one else can fill. The Third Crusade is over. It achieved little in terms of territory, but it solidified the survival of the Crusader states for another century. It was the high water mark of chivalry, a time when war was brutal but also strangely beautiful, governed by codes of honour that bound enemies together even as they tried to kill each other. We pull back now, watching the sails of Richard's fleet disappear over the western horizon, the white wakes fading into the blue of the Mediterranean. The Holy Land is quiet again, is quiet. The pilgrims begin to walk the road to Jerusalem, unarmed, guarded by the treaty of the 2 kings. The fire has burned down, but the embers are still hot. The idea of the crusade has changed. It is no longer a religious awakening, it is a political tool, a habit that Europe cannot break. The age of heroes is past. The age of cynics is about to begin. The 4th Crusade is coming, and it will not aim for the infidel. It will aim for the heart of Christendom itself. The year is 1202, and the world has shifted on its axis. We leave the sun-drenched sands of the Holy Land and the chivalric jewels of kings for a setting that is wetter, darker, and infinitely more cynical. We are standing on the damp cobblestones of Venice. The air here smells of salt, stagnant water, and the sharp tang of gold. If the Third Crusade was a tragedy of heroes, the Fourth Crusade is a tragedy of accountants. The fervour that once drove men to sell their lands for the love of God has curdled into a cold, transactional ambition. The knights of Europe still want to reclaim Jerusalem, but this time they decide to take a different route. They will strike at Egypt, the soft underbelly of Islamic power, and trade it for the holy city. But to get to Egypt, they need ships, and for ships they must go to the masters of the sea. Enter Enrico Dandolo, the Doge of Venice. He is a figure who seems to have stepped out of a dark fairy tale. He is over 90 years old and completely blind. his eyes clouded by age or perhaps, as rumours say, by a blow to the head during a diplomatic mission gone wrong years ago. Yet, despite his frailty, his mind is as sharp and cold as a jagged piece of glass. He is a patriot of the lagoon, a man who loves Venice with a ferocity that eclipses any religious vow. When the Crusader envoys arrive, asking for a fleet to carry 33,500 men and 4,500 horses, Dandolo agrees. He suspends all commerce in the city for a year to build the ships. It is a massive industrial undertaking, a gamble of the state's entire economy. The Venetians uphold their end of the bargain. The fleet is built, magnificent and ready, bobbing in the lagoon like a wooden armada. But then the math fails. The Crusaders arrive in Venice in dribs and drabs. Instead of the promised 33,000, only about 11,000 show up. The leaders, shocking in their incompetence, have overestimated their recruitment. They stare at the bill, 85,000 silver marks, and realise they cannot pay. They offer everything they have, stripping their own baggage trains of silver plate and jewellery, but they are still short by 34,000 marks. The Doge is not a charity. He has a fleet of unpaid ships and a city of angry workers. He makes a counteroffer, a proposal that chills the blood of the pious, but thrills the pragmatic. "Help us recapture the rebellious city of Zara," he says, "and we will defer the debt." There is a problem. Zara is a Christian city. It belongs to the King of Hungary, who is himself a crusader, on paper at least. To attack it is a direct violation of every holy law. The Pope, Innocent III, hears of the plan and screams his forbidding from Rome, threatening excommunication. But the leadership, desperate and trapped on the island of the Lido by the Venetians who are slowly cutting off their supplies, agree. They sail to Zara and sack it. The Pope makes good on his threat. He excommunicates the entire crusade. Imagine the absurdity. An army of holy warriors marching to do God's work, technically cast out of the church they are fighting for. The leaders, terrified of morale collapsing, simply hide the letter. They don't tell the soldiers. The lie is the first stone in the pavement of the road to hell. While wintering in the ruins of Zara, a new temptation arrives. A young Byzantine prince, Alexios Angelos, whose father was deposed and blinded by a cruel uncle, Byzantine politics were a contact sport, offers the Crusaders a deal that sounds too good to be true. If they help him take back the throne of Constantinople, he will pay their entire debt to Venice, give them 200,000 silver marks, and contribute 10,000 soldiers to the crusade. It is a lifeline. The Crusaders convince themselves that this is a just detour. Restoring a rightful king is noble, isn't it? Dandolo, who has old grudges against Byzantium, smiles his sightless smile. The fleet turns east. They are not going to Egypt. They are going to the Queen of Cities. In June 1203, the Crusader fleet arrives before Constantinople. To the rough knights of the West, the sight is overwhelming. They have never seen a city like this. It houses 500,000 people, guarded by 13 miles of triple walls, filled with gold-domed churches and ancient statues. One chronicler writes that there was no man so brave that he did not shudder, for they looked at the city not as pilgrims, but as predators measuring a giant. They attack, and in a chaotic sequence of events, the usurper uncle flees, and young Alexios is crowned co-emperor. Mission accomplished. They wait for their payment, but Alexios has promised money he does not have. The imperial treasury is empty. He tries to melt down church icons to pay the Franks, which makes his own people hate him. The Crusaders, camping outside the walls in Galata, grow restless and hungry. Riots break out in the city between the Greeks and the Latins. A fire starts, likely set by Crusaders, and burns a swath through the city. The relationship disintegrates. In early 1204, a palace coup overthrows Alexios, who is strangled naturally, and a new anti-Latin emperor takes the throne, refusing to pay a single silver coin. The Crusaders are now stranded, unpaid, unwelcome, and desperate. The bishops in the army, performing impressive mental gymnastics, declare that the Greeks are enemies of God for their treachery. The war against the infidel is officially forgotten. The war for loot begins. On April 12th, 1204, the unthinkable happens. The Crusaders storm the walls of Constantinople. They use the masts of their ships as bridges to leap onto the sea walls. The defence collapses. The army of Christ enters the Christian capital, and for 3 days they unleash a horror that history has never forgiven. They do not just loot, they desecrate. They smash into the Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom. They drink wine from the sacred chalices. A prostitute is placed on the patriarch's throne to sing bawdy songs, while soldiers strip the gold from the altar. It is a carnival of sacrilege. The cultural loss is incalculable. Constantinople was the museum of the ancient world, holding art and literature saved from the fall of Rome. The Crusaders, ignorant and greedy, melt down ancient bronze statues of Hercules and Hera just to turn them into coins. They burn libraries to warm their hands. They steal the 4 horses of St. Mark, those magnificent bronze steeds that now stand in Venice, ripping them from the hippodrome. They are not preserving civilization, they are eating it. The Venetians, possessing a better eye for art, steal the best pieces. The French and Germans mostly destroy. It is a frenzy of destruction that severs the bond between the Catholic West and the Orthodox East forever. The Great Schism, previously a theological dispute, is now a wound sealed in blood. Historians still debate whether this was a tragic accident of escalating blunders or a master plan by Dandolo from the start to destroy Venice's commercial rival. The truth is likely in the middle, a cascade of desperate choices made by men who had lost their moral compass. When the smoke clears, a Latin empire is established on the ruins, with the Flemish count crowned emperor, but it is a hollow state, a corpse propped up on a throne. The Fourth Crusade, launched to save the Holy Land, ends without a single crusader setting foot in Jerusalem. Instead, they have destroyed the only power that could have protected Europe's eastern flank. As the ships are loaded with the spoils of a murdered city, the Pope in Rome is horrified, writing letters of condemnation that arrive too late to matter. The Crusaders are rich, but their souls are bankrupt. They have won the world and lost the crusade. We float away from the smoking ruins of the Golden Horn, watching the Venetian galleys row west, heavy with stolen gold. The idea of the crusade has been mortally wounded. It has been revealed as a beast that can turn on its master. The East will never trust the West again. And in the silence of the violated Hagia Sophia, the ghosts of antiquity weep for a world that has been melted down for pocket change. The smoke from the burning libraries of Constantinople drifts away, dispersing into the cold winds of the early 13th century, but it leaves behind a residue of ash in the soul of Europe. The world feels older, more cynical. The great knights, the lions, and emperors have all failed. They chased gold, they chased glory, and they left the holy sepulchre in the hands of the infidel. In this vacuum of leadership, a strange and unsettling logic begins to take root in the minds of the common people. They whisper that the Crusades failed not because of bad tactics, but because the warriors were impure. The knights were greedy, the kings were proud. God, they reason, does not want the strength of arms. He wants the purity of hearts. And who is purer than the innocent? We drift now to the year 1212, to a countryside gripped by a fever that sits somewhere between mass hysteria and divine revelation. This is the moment of the children's crusade. It begins with a shepherd boy named Stephen in the village of Cloyes, France. He is 12 years old. He claims that Christ appeared to him while he was tending his sheep and gave him a letter for the King of France. He says the sea will dry up before him, and he will lead a procession of children to the Holy Land to convert the Muslims not with swords, but with peace. It is a story that should have ended with a pat on the head and a warm meal, but instead it catches fire. Thousands of children, adolescents, and the poor, the pueri, a term historians still argue over, meaning either literal children or simply the landless, dependent poor, begin to follow him. We see them gathering, a ragged army of little ones carrying wooden crosses and candles, singing hymns with high, unbroken voices. They march to Saint Denis, their eyes shining with a terrifying certainty. At the same time, in Germany, a boy named Nicholas of Cologne preaches a similar message. He leads a column of perhaps 20,000 people over the Alps. Imagine the sight, a snake of humanity winding through the freezing passes of the St. Gotthard, ill-equipped, shivering, leaving a trail of small frozen bodies in the snow. They are marching toward the Mediterranean, believing that when they reach Genoa, the waters will part like the Red Sea. They arrive at the coast, exhausted and sunburnt. The citizens of Genoa watch them with pity and confusion. The children stand on the shore, praying, waiting for the miracle. The waves crash, the tide rolls in. The sea remains stubbornly wet. The disappointment is a physical blow. Some settle in Genoa, becoming servants. Others try to walk home, ridiculed by the very villages that had cheered them on. It is said that some boarded ships offered by two merchants in Marseille, Hugh the Iron and William the Pig, names that sound like fairy tale villains, only to be sold into slavery in North Africa. While modern scholarship suggests the slavery ending may be a later myth, the tragedy remains absolute. The Children's Crusade is the death of innocence, a heartbreaking testament to a society so desperate for redemption that it was willing to sacrifice its own future on the altar of a dream. But while the children are walking to their doom, a darker, colder crusade is launching in the south of France. The eyes of the church have turned inward. If the Holy Land cannot be saved, perhaps it is because there is rot in the foundation of Christendom itself. In the sun-drenched region of Languedoc, a culture of poetry, troubadours, and tolerance has flourished. But growing alongside it is a movement known as Catharism. The Cathars are the good men, dualists who believe that the physical world was created by Satan and only the spirit is good. They reject the corruption of the Catholic Church, its wealth and its hierarchy. To the Pope, Innocent III, this is not just a difference of opinion, it is a cancer. It is treason against God. In 1208, a papal legate is murdered in Languedoc. It is the spark that ignites the pyre. The Pope does something unprecedented. He calls for a crusade, not against the Saracens in the east, but against Christians in France. He offers the same indulgences, the forgiveness of sins, to anyone who will march south and kill the heretics. The result is the Albigensian Crusade, a 20-year war of terrifying brutality that tears the heart out of medieval culture. The northern barons, hungry for the rich lands of the south, answer the call with enthusiasm. They are led by Simon de Montfort, a man of iron will and zero compromise. In July 1209, the Crusader army arrives at the city of Béziers. The city is a mix of Catholics and Cathars, living as neighbours. The Crusaders demand that the Catholics hand over the heretics. They refuse. The army storms the walls. What follows is one of the most infamous moments in history. The Crusader soldiers, unsure how to distinguish the heretics from the faithful in the chaos of the sack, ask the papal legate, Anno Amori, what to do. His reported reply echoes through the centuries like a thunderclap. Cae Dietehos, novit enim Dominus, qui sunt eius, kill them all. For the Lord knows those that are his. Whether he said those exact words is debated by historians, but the actions of the army leave no doubt about the sentiment. They kill everyone. 7,000 people are slaughtered in the church of St. Mary Magdalene alone. The blood runs down the steps into the street. The city burns. It is a war of extermination. The Crusaders move from town to town, burning perfects, the Cathar holy men, at the stake in mass executions. At Minerve, 140 Cathars jump into the flames willingly rather than recant. It is a collision of two kinds of fanaticism. The cold, legalistic fury of the Inquisition and the ecstatic, world-denying faith of the martyrs. The Albigensian Crusade changes the definition of holy war forever. It is no longer about reclaiming a distant land. It is about policing the mind. It is a civil war sanctified by the cross. We watch as the vibrant culture of the South, the land of courtly love and Occitan poetry, is crushed under the boot of the North. The castles of the Cathars, Montségur, Pays-Repertus, perched on impossible crags like eagles' nests, are besieged and broken one by one. The last holdouts at Montségur are captured in 1244. Marching down the mountain to a massive bonfire in the field below, they sing as they burn. As the smoke clears over the Pyrenees, Europe is different. It is more unified, perhaps, but it is a unity bought with terror. The machinery of the Crusade, once designed to protect pilgrims, has been turned against the neighbour. The Inquisition is born from these ashes, a permanent institution designed to root out hidden thoughts. The era of the grand, romantic expedition is fading, replaced by a grim, bureaucratic enforcement of orthodoxy. The Crusades have come home, and they have brought the sword with them. We pull back from the smoking ruins of Béziers, feeling the chill of a world where safety is found only in conformity. The dream of Jerusalem is still there, but it is faint now, obscured by the smoke of burning Christians. The next time a king goes east, he will not be a simple warrior. He will be a man who tries to solve the riddle of the crusade with his mind. A man so modern, he seems to have fallen through a hole in time. The diplomat is coming. The smoke of the Albigensian pyres drifts away, leaving a Europe that is scarred and suspicious. The old model of the crusade, the fervent blood-soaked charge of the faithful, has begun to feel like a relic of a simpler, more brutal age. Into this disillusioned world steps a man who seems to have been born in the wrong century entirely. Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor, is known to his contemporaries as Stupa Mundi, the wonder of the world. He is a creature of contradictions, a German emperor raised in the sun-drenched, multicultural island of Sicily, a Christian king who keeps a harem, travels with a private zoo of giraffes and leopards, and speaks fluent Arabic. He is a scientist who experiments with falconry and anatomy, a poet and a skeptic. To the Pope, he is the Antichrist. To history, he is the first modern man on a medieval throne, and in 1228 he launches the strangest crusade of all, the crusade where no one fights. Frederick's journey to the Holy Land begins not with a blessing but with a curse. He has promised to go on crusade for years, but keeps delaying, first for politics, then for illness. The new Pope, Gregory Notman, finally loses patience and excommunicates him. Frederick, unfazed, sets sail anyway. He is a crusader who is technically banned from the church he is fighting for. His army is small, barely a few thousand knights, hardly enough to capture a village, let alone a kingdom. But Frederick does not bring siege engines. He brings logic. He understands the geopolitical chessboard of the East better than any Westerner alive. He knows that the Sultan of Egypt, Al-Kamil, is currently locked in a bitter power struggle with his brother in Damascus. Al-Kamil needs an ally, or at least a distraction. Frederick presents himself as both. We float over the port of Acre as Frederick arrives. The local clergy, obeying the Pope, refuse to greet him. The Templars and Hospitallers, always sticklers for rules, are hostile. Frederick ignores them. He sends envoys to Al-Kamil, not with threats of fire and brimstone, but with questions about philosophy, geometry, and the interpretation of Aristotelian texts. It is a surreal diplomatic courtship. The Sultan and the Emperor exchange letters that are less about war and more about the nature of the soul. They trade gifts. Frederick sends a mathematically complex clock. Al-Kamil sends an elephant. They are two intellectual giants playing a high-stakes game of poker while the rest of the world sharpens its knives. The negotiations take place in a tented camp near Jaffa. Frederick speaks the language of his enemy. He respects Islamic culture, famously criticising the Christians of Acre for being dirty and boorish compared to the refined Muslims of the Levant. He plays on Al-Kamil's fears, subtly implying that his massive army, which is actually tiny, is just over the horizon, while simultaneously offering himself as a shield against other, more fanatical crusades. It is a bluff of epic proportions, delivered with a smile. Al-Kamil, weary of war and needing to secure his northern flank, agrees to a deal that shocks the world. On February 18, 1229, the Treaty of Jaffa is signed. With the stroke of a pen, Frederick II achieves what Richard the Lionheart and Philip Augustus could not achieve with all the armies of Europe. Jerusalem is returned to Christian hands. Along with it comes Bethlehem and Nazareth. It is a stunning diplomatic coup, but there are conditions that enrage the fundamentalists on both sides. The Muslims retain control of the Temple Mount, the Haram al-Sharif, and the Islamic call to prayer will continue to ring out in the holy city. The city is to be unfortified, an open city of peace. Frederick enters Jerusalem on March 17th. There is no cheering crowd, no weeping procession. The Patriarch of Jerusalem refuses to attend, and the city is under an interdict. No masses can be sung. Frederick walks into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, surrounded only by his German knights. In a scene of breathtaking arrogance and symbolism, he walks up to the altar, lifts the crown of Jerusalem, and places it on his own head. No bishop anoints him. He crowns himself, claiming the city by right of his marriage to the heiress of the kingdom, and by the power of his own intellect. Later that day, he visits the Dome of the Rock. The Muslim custodians, trying to be polite, have ordered the muezzin, the man who calls the prayer, to be silent out of respect for the emperor. Frederick, noticing the silence, asks why the prayer was not called. When told, he is reportedly annoyed, saying, "I came to Jerusalem to hear the praise of God called out in the night. Do not silence your customs for me." It is a moment of tolerance that is almost incomprehensible to the 13th century mind. He discusses the architecture of the mosque with the scholars, correcting them on measurements, showing off his knowledge. He is a tourist king, admiring the beauty of a faith he is supposed to be destroying. But the victory is hollow. The Christians of the Holy Land feel betrayed. They wanted a fortress, not a treaty. They know that an unfortified Jerusalem is indefensible. The Templars plot to ambush Frederick. He learns of it and surrounds their compound, threatening to kidnap the Grand Master. It is a civil war in all but name. When Frederick leaves Acre to return to Europe, where he has to fight the Pope's armies that are invading his lands, the local butchers and fishmongers pelt him with entrails and garbage as he walks to the docks. He has given them back their holy city, and they hate him for it. Frederick sails away, leaving behind a fragile peace that cannot last. He has proven that coexistence is possible, but he has also proven that the world is not ready for it. The Treaty of Jaffa is a 10-year truce. It is a pause button, not a stop button, a The moment the truce expires, the reality of the region crashes back in. The Khwarezmian Turks, a wild, displaced people fleeing the Mongol onslaught in the east, sweep through the region like a hurricane. In 1244, they sack Jerusalem, burning the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and slaughtering the Christian population. The city is lost again, and this time it will remain lost for nearly 700 years. Frederick's crusade stands as a strange, lonely monument in the history of the Holy Wars. It was a triumph of reason over fanaticism, a glimpse of a world where diplomacy could replace slaughter, but it was a seed planted on stone. It could not take root. The West looks at the loss of Jerusalem in 1244 and concludes that Frederick's way, the way of words and treaties, was a failure. The pendulum swings back. The next king to take the cross will be the anti-Frederick, a man of pure, blinding faith who believes that the only way to win is to suffer. The saint is coming, and he brings with him the twilight of the crusading ideal. The wheel of history turns from the cynic to the saint. We leave behind the clever, negotiated peace of Frederick II and move forward to the mid-13th century, where the last great flicker of the crusading spirit burns in the heart of a man who will one day be canonized. This is Louis the Mind, King of France. If Frederick was the mind of Europe, Louis is its soul. He is a figure carved from white marble, tall, thin, with a face that radiates a terrifyingly sincere piety. He wears hair shirts under his royal velvet to mortify his flesh. He washes the feet of beggars. He invites lepers to his table. In 1244, gravely ill and drifting near death, he makes a vow. If God spares him, he will take the cross. He wakes, he recovers, and he keeps his word. But this is not the disorganized scramble of the past. Louis spends 4 years preparing, turning France into a logistical machine. He builds a port specifically for the crusade, Aigues-Mortes, on the Mediterranean coast. He gathers provisions, ships, and money with a meticulousness that would make a modern quartermaster weep with joy. This is the 7th Crusade, and it is the best planned, best funded, and arguably the most tragic of them all. We float above the delta of the Nile in the year 1249. The target, once again, is Egypt. The logic remains the same. To kill the snake, you must cut off its head. The French fleet arrives at Damietta, the same city that had stalled the 5th Crusade decades earlier, but this time the landing is a triumph. Louis, unable to wait for the landing craft to hit the beach, leaps into the chest-deep water in full armour, wading ashore with his shield raised, a golden fleur-de-lis shimmering in the African sun. The Saracen garrison, panicked by the sheer ferocity of the arrival, flees. Damietta falls without a siege. The storehouses are full. The city is intact. It seems that God is finally smiling, but the Nile is a treacherous host. The army waits for the summer floods to recede, trapped in the humidity of the delta, while the discipline of the troops begins to rot in the heat. In November, they march south. Their goal is Cairo, but standing in their way is the fortress city of Mansoura, the place of victory. It is here that the tragedy unfolds, driven not by the king, but by his brother, Robert of Artois. Robert is the classic tragic archetype. Brave, hot-headed, and fatally arrogant. When the Crusaders find a ford across the canal that separates them from the enemy camp, Robert leads the vanguard across. He catches the Egyptian camp by surprise, wiping out the defenders in their bathhouses and tents. It is a stunning opening move. Louis sends orders. Wait. Regroup. Do not advance. But Robert, drunk on adrenaline and glory, ignores the king. He sees the open gates of Mansoura and thinks he can take the city alone. He spurs his horse. The Templars, bound by honour not to let the prince ride alone, reluctantly follow. They thunder into the narrow, winding streets of the city. It is a trap. The Mamluks, The elite slave soldiers of the Sultan have been waiting. They block the streets with logs and carts. From the rooftops, a storm of masonry, arrows, and Greek fire rains down. The heavy cavalry, trapped in the alleyways, cannot manoeuvre. It is a massacre. Robert of Artois is killed. The Grand Master of the Templars loses an eye and barely escapes. The vanguard is annihilated. When Louis arrives with the main army, he finds not a victory, but a desperate rescue mission. He manages to hold the line, fighting with a cold, desperate fury. But the momentum is gone. The Crusaders are now stuck outside the walls of Mansoura, and the trap is closing. Then comes the true enemy. It is not the sword, but the microbe. The Egyptians blockade the Nile, cutting off the supply ships from Damietta. Famine sets in. Then comes scurvy and dysentery. The camp becomes a hospital of horrors. Men's gums rot until they have to cut away the dead flesh just to eat. Their bodies waste away from the army sickness. Louis himself is stricken. He is so weak that his servants have to cut a hole in the back of his breeches because he cannot stop the dysentery long enough to use a latrine. Yet even in this humiliation, he remains magnificent. He refuses to abandon his men. He is offered a chance to flee on a ship to Damietta, but he whispers that he will die with his soldiers rather than leave them. In April 1250, the retreat begins. It is a death march. The weakened knights swaying in their saddles are picked off by Mamluk archers. The king, barely conscious, is guarded by a few loyal knights who beat back the attackers. Finally, at a village called Fariscourt, the end comes. The King of France, the most powerful monarch in Christendom, surrenders. He is taken in chains. Well, perhaps not literal iron chains, for he is a valuable prize, but the weight of the captivity is heavier than iron. He is held in the house of a scribe in Mansoura. The Mamluks, who have just murdered their own sultan in a palace coup, threaten to kill him too. There are stories of Mamluk emirs rushing into his cell with blood on their swords, testing his resolve. Louis remains calm, almost eerily so. He answers their threats with silence or soft prayers. He is terrifyingly unshakable. The ransom negotiation is legendary. The Mamluks demand the return of Damietta and 400,000 livres tournois, a sum so vast it represents the annual income of the French crown. Louis does not haggle. He agrees instantly. The Mamluks are stunned. They are used to the bazaar of war, where every price is debated. The Sultan is reportedly so impressed by Louis's dignity that he knocks 100,000 livres off the price, though historians debate whether this discount was ever actually honoured. Louis pays the money, hands over the city, and is released. But here is where the saint reveals his true quality. Most kings, having suffered such a humiliation, would sail home to the comforts of Paris immediately. Louis does not. He sends his wife and children home, but he stays. For 4 years, the King of France lives in the Holy Land, effectively acting as its ruler. He realizes that he cannot conquer it, so he decides to build it. He pours his own money into rebuilding the fortifications of Acre, Caesarea, Jaffa, and Sidon. We can still see his work today. The massive, smooth stones of the walls of Caesarea are his legacy. He walks the streets of Acre wearing simple clothes, settling disputes, funding hospitals, and trying to heal the fractures of the Crusader states. He is a ghost of a king, a man doing penance for a failure he believes is his own fault. He believes God punished the crusade because he was not worthy. It is a heartbreaking conclusion, a good man crushing himself under the weight of a divine silence. In 1254, news arrives that his mother, Blanche of Castile, who had been ruling France in his absence, has died. Louis finally collapses in grief. He has no choice now. He must return. He boards the ship at Acre. looking back at the land he tried so hard to save. He leaves behind a stronger kingdom, but a doomed one. He has bought them time, perhaps another 40 years, but he has not changed the inevitable math. The Mamluks, the very men who captured him, are now the masters of Egypt. They are a new breed of warrior, ruthless, professional, and united. They are not interested in truces or trade. As Louis's ship disappears over the horizon, the sun is setting on the era of the Latin East. The Crusades of the great kings are over. The next chapter will not be written by monarchs, but by a storm from the steppes and a slave soldier with 2 different coloured eyes who intends to finish what Saladin started. The lion is gone. The panther is waking up. The sun rises in the east, but it brings no warmth. It shines through a haze of dust that stretches from the Great Wall of China to the banks of the Tigris. We have reached the middle of the 13th century, and the chessboard of the world is being overturned. While the kings of Europe were bickering over crumbling castles in the Levant, a storm was gathering in the steppes of Mongolia. This is the era of the horse lords. The Mongols have arrived. They are a force unlike anything history has ever seen, a hurricane of cavalry that moves faster than news can travel. In 1258, under the command of Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis, they reach the gates of Baghdad, the intellectual and spiritual heart of the Islamic world. The city falls. The destruction is so absolute that it defies comprehension. Chroniclers write that the Tigris River ran black with the ink of throne books and red with the blood of scholars. The Caliph is rolled in a carpet and trampled to death by horses, a royal execution that avoids spilling royal blood, but ends a dynasty that had lasted for 500 years. The message is clear. The old world is dead. To the Crusaders huddled in their coastal fortresses, the Mongols are a terrifying enigma. Some, clinging to desperate hope, believe these riders are the soldiers of Prester John, a mythical Christian king of the East who has come to save them. It is a fatal delusion. The Mongols are not saviours. They are an indiscriminately destructive force of nature. They demand submission from everyone, Muslim, Christian, Jew. They sweep into Syria, taking Aleppo and Damascus. The Crusader states are now sandwiched between the sea and the end of the world. But in Egypt, something hard and sharp has risen to meet the hammer. The Ayyubid dynasty, the descendants of Saladin, has grown soft and fractured. In their place, the slave soldiers have taken charge. These are the Mamluks. They are boys bought from the slave markets of the Russian steppes and the Caucasus, Turks, Circassians, Cumans, trained from childhood in a single art, war. They have no family, no land, no loyalty, except to their comrades and their masters. But in 1250, they realised they were the ones holding the swords. They overthrew their masters and founded a dynasty of the sword. They are professional, ruthless, and terrifyingly disciplined. In 1260, the 2 storms collide. The Mongols send envoys to Cairo, demanding surrender. The Mamluk Sultan, Qutuz, does not negotiate. He executes the envoys and hangs their heads from the gate of Zuwaila. It is a declaration of total war. He gathers his army and marches north, crossing the Sinai into Palestine. He is joined by his general, a man named Baibars, a towering warrior with a cataract in one eye that gives him a ghostly, mismatched stare. They meet the Mongol army at a place called Ain Jalut, the spring of Goliath, in the Jezreel Valley. It is one of the most important battles in human history. If the Mongols win, Egypt falls, and likely all of North Africa and perhaps Europe will follow. If the Mamluks win, the myth of Mongol invincibility is shattered. The Crusaders in nearby Acre sit on their walls and watch, paralysed. They grant the Mamluks safe passage to fight the Mongols, a decision born of pure survival instinct. They fear the devil they know slightly less than the devil they don't. The battle is a masterpiece of deception. Baibars leads the vanguard, using hit-and-run tactics to lure the Mongols into the valley. The Mongols, used to chasing fleeing enemies, take the bait. They charge into the trap. The Mamluk, heavy cavalry hiding in the hills, slams into their flanks. For the first time, the Mongol wave breaks. The horse lords are routed. Kutuz and Baibars stand victorious on the field. They have saved the Islamic world. But there is no room for two lions in one den. On the journey back to Egypt, Baibars assassinates Kutuz, stabbing him in the neck while pretending to kiss his hand, or so the story goes, and claims the Sultanate for himself. The Panther has taken the throne. Sultan Baibars is the nightmare the Crusaders have been dreading. He is not like Saladin. Saladin was a gentleman who played by the rules of chivalry. Baibars is a former slave who knows that the only rule is survival. He has no interest in truces or trade or the polite fiction of coexistence. He sees the Crusader states as a cancer that has been allowed to fester for too long. He intends to cut it out. His method is total war. He moves with a speed that leaves the Franks dizzy. 1 month, he is in Cairo. The next, he is burning the orchards of Jaffa. He builds a navy. He strengthens the postal roads. He creates a spy network that reaches into the courts of Europe. He begins to pick off the Crusader cities one by one. Caesarea falls. Arsuf falls. The Hospitallers and Templars, once the masters of the land, find themselves besieged in their own castles, watching the horizon for banners that never come. Europe is tired. There are no more kings coming to save them. In 1268, Baibars turns his mismatched eyes toward Antioch. The great city of the north, the first conquest of the First Crusade, has stood for 170 years. Its walls are legendary, but Baibars is a siege engineer of genius. He surrounds the city, cutting off all hope. When the walls are breached, the restraint of the past is gone. Baibars orders the gates locked. No one leaves. The massacre that follows is efficient and industrial. The entire population is either killed or enslaved. The markets of the Middle East are so flooded with slaves from Antioch that the price of a young boy drops to the cost of a chicken. But the most chilling artifact of this conquest is a letter. The Prince of Antioch, Bohemond VI, was not in the city when it fell. Baibars writes to him, describing in excruciating poetic detail exactly what happened to his people. He writes, "Had you seen your knights trampled under the hooves of the horses, your provinces given up to pillage? Had you seen the fire running through your palaces, your dead burned in this world before going down to the fires of the next? You would have wished to be dust." He ends the letter with a psychological knife twist. Since you were not here, you have not seen the horror. So consider that we are writing to tell you that you are alive only because you were absent. Be happy that you have not seen what your God has allowed. It is a terrifying piece of diplomacy. It is not just a taunt. It is a statement of dominance. Baibars is telling the Crusaders that their time is over. God has changed sides. The fall of Antioch sends a shockwave of despair through the remaining outposts. Crac des Chevaliers, the greatest castle in the world, the headquarters of the Hospitallers, is next. It sits on a mountain spur, seemingly invincible. Baibars takes it in 1271, not just with force, but with a trick. He forges a letter from the Hospitaller Grand Master in Tripoli, ordering the garrison to surrender. The knights, exhausted and hopeless, believe the letter and open the gates. The great castle, the symbol of Latin power, becomes a Mamluk fortress. We drift south now, over a landscape that is rapidly changing colours. The crosses are coming down from the towers. The bells are being melted into cannons. Baibars is relentless. He drinks kumis, fermented mare's milk, plays polo with the heads of his enemies, and sleeps little. He is the force of history accelerating. He dies in 1277, accidentally drinking a cup of poisoned kumis he had intended for a rival, a fitting end for a man who lived by the plot. But he has done his work. He has broken the back of Outremer. The kingdom of Jerusalem is now just a shadow. It consists of the city of Acre and a few coastal towns clinging to the edge of the sea like barnacles on a rock. The people in these cities live in a state of suspended animation. They trade, they pray, they hold tournaments, but there is a hysterical edge to their laughter. They know what is coming. The Mamluks are not finished. Baibar's successors, Kalawun and his son Al-Ashraf Khalil, inherit the mission. The vow has been made. Not one stone of the Frankish fortresses shall be left upon another. The sun sets over the Mediterranean, casting a blood-red path across the water toward the west. But there are no ships on that path. No relief fleet is gathering in Genoa or Venice. No king is taking the cross in Paris or London. The Crusades have become a bore to Europe, a drain on the treasury, an old story that no longer excites. The Latin East is alone. The Mamluk storm has scoured the land clean. All that remains is the final stronghold, the city of Acre, where the last knights of Christendom are gathering for the final stand. The atmosphere is heavy with the static of an approaching thunderstorm. The silence before the end is the loudest sound of all. The final spring arrives in the Holy Land, not with the gentle scent of orange blossoms, but with the heavy metallic taste of inevitability. It is April 1291, and we are hovering over the city of Acre. Below us, the city is a jewel of the Mediterranean, a place of bustling markets, Gothic arches, and high stone towers that look out over the glittering blue sea. It is the last capital of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the final sanctuary where the refugees of 100 lost battles have gathered. But if we listen closely, beneath the cries of the fishmongers and the ringing of church bells, there is a vibration in the ground, a low, rhythmic thrumming that shakes the dust from the window ledges. It is the sound of the end of the world approaching. The Mamluk Sultan Al-Ashraf Khalil has emptied the armories of Egypt and Syria. He is not coming to conquer, he is coming to erase. On the horizon, the enemy appears like a rising tide of white and steel. The numbers are staggering. Chroniclers of the time, their pens shaking with fear, record an army of 160,000 infantry and 60,000 cavalry. Historians today suggest these numbers are exaggerated, as medieval math often surrendered to panic, but the reality is terrifying enough. The Mamluk army stretches from one side of the peninsula to the other, a solid wall of humanity blocking the landward exit. But it is not the soldiers that freeze the blood of the defenders on the walls. It is the machines. The Sultan has brought with him a train of siege engines, the likes of which have never been seen. They have names. These wooden dragons, the Victorious, the Furious. They are catapults capable of hurling rocks, weighing hundreds of pounds, smashing the limestone walls as if they were made of sugar. And then there are the drums, the nakara, massive kettle drums mounted on camels, beaten with a relentless, maddening rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. They do not stop. They beat through the day. They beat through the night. It is psychological warfare, a heartbeat of doom designed to deny the Christians sleep, to rattle their teeth, to remind them that time is running out. Inside the city, the atmosphere is a strange mix of hedonism and holiness. Some pray in the crypts, others drink in the taverns, deciding that if they are to die, they will die drunk. But on the walls, the old rivalries are finally forgotten. The Templars and the Hospitallers, who have spent 2 centuries bickering and occasionally killing each other, now stand shoulder to shoulder. The Grand Master of the Templars, Guillaume de Beaujeu, a man of iron experience, takes command of the defence. He knows the odds. He knows no fleet is coming from Europe. He fights not for victory but for a good death. The siege begins in earnest. For 6 weeks the sky is dark with arrows and Greek fire. The walls of Acre, double thick and studded with towers, begin to groan under the assault. The accursed tower, the keystone of the defence, is hammered relentlessly. We watch as the stone chips away, hour by hour, day by day. The Mamluk sappers, digging like moles, tunnel underneath the foundations, propping them up with wood and setting them on fire. The ground sags. The tower leans. The defenders fight with a desperation that borders on madness, throwing rocks, boiling oil, and even their own bodies into the breaches. But the tide is rising, and the sand is running out. On Friday, May 18th, the sun rises through a thick, heavy mist. The drums stop. The silence is sudden and terrifying. Then, a single trumpet blasts. The final assault begins. The Mamluk army surges forward, a wave of white tunics crashing against the broken stones. They pour into the breach at the accursed tower. The fighting is hand-to-hand, intimate and brutal. In the chaos, Guillaume de Beaujeu is struck by a spear, or perhaps an arrow, that pierces his side. He turns to withdraw, and his knights, thinking he is fleeing, cry out in panic. "I am not running," he gasps, pointing to the wound. "I am dead." He is carried away on his shield, and with him goes the soul of the defence. Panic sweeps through the city like a firestorm. The walls are lost. The civilian population rushes to the harbour. It is a scene of absolute heartbreak. We drift over the docks, watching the frantic crush of humanity. People are throwing themselves into small rowboats, offering bags of gold, jewels, anything to be taken to the few ships waiting in the harbour. The boats are overloaded. Many capsize, spilling silk-clad nobles and weeping children into the churned water. There is a dark, tragic irony here. The Patriarch of Jerusalem, an elderly man named Nicholas of Hanapes, tries to escape on a small skiff, but he allows so many desperate refugees to climb aboard with him that the boat sinks under the weight of his own charity, or perhaps the sheer panic of his flock. He drowns in the harbour, sinking beneath the blue water just yards from safety. By nightfall, the city is burning. The sky is lit by the orange glow of 100 fires. The screams of the dying mix with the call of the victors. But the fighting is not over. In the southwest corner of the city, the great fortress of the Templars stands firm. It is a massive structure built into the sea, impenetrable and proud. Inside, the surviving Templars and a few hundred civilians have barricaded themselves. They are the last ember of the Crusades. For 10 days they hold out. The Sultan offers them terms: surrender and you can leave. They agree. The Mamluk soldiers enter to oversee the evacuation, but inside the dark halls the discipline breaks down. The soldiers begin to harass the women and boys. The Templars, enraged, slam the gates shut. They slaughter the Mamluk escort and raise the flag of defiance once more. The Sultan is furious. He orders the fortress to be undermined. The sappers go back to work. On May 28th, the foundations give way. With a sound like thunder that echoes across the bay, the landward wall of the Templar fortress collapses. But it doesn't just fall. The entire structure, weakened by the tunnels and the weight of the fighting, comes crashing down. It buries everyone, the defending knights and the attacking Mamluks, in a single massive tomb of stone. The dust cloud billows out over the sea, hanging in the air like a shroud. Silence finally returns to Acre. The last sword has been swung, the last prayer has been whispered. The Mamluks waste no time. Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil orders the city to be levelled. He does not want to rule Acre, he wants to ensure that the Franks can never return. The walls are dismantled stone by stone, the churches are pulled down, the irrigation canals are smashed. The great city, which had hosted kings and emperors, which had been the gateway to the east for 200 years, is reduced to a pile of rubble and a memory. We pull back, rising higher and higher into the smoke-filled air. The coastline of the Holy Land stretches out beneath us, a ribbon of gold and green. But the crosses are gone. The castles are empty shells, staring out at the sea with blind windows. The Latin kingdom of Jerusalem, born in the blood of 1099, has died in the fire of 1291. It lasted 192 years, less time than the United States has existed today. It was a blink of an eye in the history of the East, a violent, passionate, misguided and heroic interlude. The ships carrying the survivors sail west, disappearing into the sunset. They carry with them the icons, the relics, and the stories that will fuel the imagination of Europe for centuries. But they leave behind their dead, and they leave behind a land that has been forever changed. The Crusades are over. The soldiers have gone. The diplomats have failed. The saints have died. Now only the ghosts remain, drifting through the ruins of Acre, whispering to the wind. The experiment is finished. The bridge between the worlds has collapsed. As the sun dips below the horizon, turning the Mediterranean into a sheet of dark purple glass, we feel the heavy finality of the moment. The door is closed. The key is lost. The long war for the Holy Land has ended, not with a treaty, but with a silence so profound it can still be heard if you stand on the ruins of the seawall today. The Middle Ages are beginning to wane. A new world is waiting to be born, but it will be a world defined by this scar. The dream is dead. Long live the memory. The dust of Acre settles, drifting down through the water to rest on the seabed, burying the armour and the ambitions of 2 centuries in the quiet silt of the Mediterranean. The noise of the Crusades, the thunder of hooves, the ringing of church bells, the clash of steel, fades into a silence that stretches across the sea. We are drifting now in the aftermath, moving forward through the years like a ghost, walking through an empty house. The fall of the last city does not bring a new beginning. It brings a strange, hollow realization to Europe. The news travels north, but this time there is no Council of Clermont, no weeping crowds, no tearing of cloaks. The kings of England and France are too busy fighting each other to care about a strip of land in the east. The Pope calls for a new crusade, but his voice echoes in empty halls. The fever has broken. The world has woken up from its long, violent dream, and in the cold light of morning the cost seems too high and the prize too distant. But history is not done with the Crusaders. It has one final, cruel act to play out, not in the Holy Land, but in the heart of Paris. The Knights Templar, the bankers of the Holy War, have returned to France. They are immensely rich, powerful, and arrogant, a state within a state, with no Holy Land left to protect. They are a sword without a war. King Philip the Fairforce of France, known as the Fair, a reference to his looks, not his justice, owes them a staggering amount of money. He decides to cancel his debt, not with gold, but with fire. On the dawn of Friday, October 13th, 1307, a date that many historians believe gave birth to the superstition of Friday the 13th, Philip's agents strike. In a coordinated raid across France, every Templar is arrested. They are accused of impossible crimes, spitting on the cross, worshipping a severed head, heresy, sodomy. It is a show trial, the medieval equivalent of a political purge. We watch the last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, an old man who had fought on the walls of Acre, being dragged in chains. He is tortured until he confesses, then recants. On a quiet evening in March 1314, he is burned at the stake on a small island in the Seine, near Notre Dame. As the flames rise, legend says he curses the king and the pope to join him before the court of God within a year. Both men die within months. It is a fittingly dramatic, if eerie, end to the order that was born in the stables of Solomon. The warrior monks are smoke and ash. The age of the crusade is legally, spiritually dead. So what remains? As we pull further back, rising high enough to see the curve of the earth, we see the scars and the gifts left behind. The Crusades were a tragedy, yes, but they were also a bridge. Across that bridge, amidst the blood, walked things that changed the world. We see the Crusaders returning home, not just with scars, but with tastes. They bring back spices, pepper, cinnamon, ginger, that wake up the dull palate of medieval Europe. They bring back sugar, a luxury that will eventually reshape the global economy. They bring back fruits, the apricot, the lemon, and the damson plum, named after Damascus. Even our language is peppered with souvenirs. Words like admiral, mattress, sofa, and cotton are Arabic gifts brought back in the baggage trains of the knights. More importantly, they bring back light, the contact with the sophisticated Islamic world, which had preserved and expanded upon the knowledge of the ancient Greeks, helps to spark the intellectual revival of the West. The works of Aristotle, lost to Europe for centuries, are translated from Arabic back into Latin. The architecture changes. The pointed arches of Gothic cathedrals, which seem to reach for heaven, may well have been inspired by the architecture of Cairo and Jerusalem. It is the ultimate irony. The wars intended to destroy the infidel ended up enriching the West with their wisdom. But the scars are deep. In the Middle East, the memory of the Crusades hardens into a trauma that endures. The word crusade itself becomes a loaded weapon, a symbol of Western aggression and hypocrisy. The tolerant cosmopolitan world of the early Islamic caliphates was forced to become harder, more militarized to survive the invasion. The Mongol invasion and the Crusades together ended the Islamic Golden Age, replacing the philosopher with the soldier. The trust was broken, and the pieces have never quite been put back together. Historians still argue intensely about how much of the modern conflict between the West and the Middle East can truly be traced back to these wars, or if we simply use the Crusades as a convenient metaphor for modern problems. But the ghost is there, lingering in the rhetoric of politicians and extremists, a shadow that refuses to fade. Yet there is something else, something more human than politics. There are the stories. The Crusades gave birth to a mythology that has captivated us for 1,000 years. We still tell the tales of Richard and Saladin, of the leper king and the shepherd children. We romanticize the knights in shining armour, forgetting the dysentery and the massacres, because we need to believe in the possibility of a quest. We need to believe that there is something worth walking 3,000 miles for. The reality was brutal, dirty, and often pointless, but the idea of the crusade, the journey of the soul through darkness, remains one of the most powerful narratives in human history. We are drifting away now, moving faster than time. The stone walls of the castles in Syria crumble under the sun, turning the colour of honey. The forests of Europe grow over the graves of the pilgrims. The maps are redrawn again and again. Empires rise and fall like the chest of a sleeping giant. The Ottomans take Constantinople. The New World is discovered. The industrial fires burn. The world rushes toward the present. But if you listen very closely, in the quiet places of the earth, you can still hear the echo. You can hear it in the wind blowing through the ruins of Crac des Chevaliers. You can hear it in the silence of the Holy Sepulchre at midnight. It is the sound of millions of footsteps walking on a road of good intentions and terrible mistakes. It is the sound of humanity searching for God and finding only itself. The camera of our mind pulls back one last time. The earth is a blue marble. in the vast velvet darkness of space. The fires of the 12th century are just tiny sparks, flickering and going out. The shouting is over. The pain is gone. All that is left is the history, written in ink and blood, and the quiet, enduring earth that holds it all. The story of the Crusades is finished. The book is closed. The knights have laid down their swords, and the kings have taken off their crowns. It is time to rest. The journey is over. The last page has turned. Let the images of the desert sun and the glittering armour fade gently from your mind. They are just stories now, safe in the past, unable to touch you. You are here in the soft, safe embrace of the present. Feel the weight of your body sinking deeper into the mattress, as if gravity is a warm blanket pulling you down into comfort. The tension in your shoulders, the worry in your mind, let it all dissolve like mist in the morning sun. Breathe in slowly, breathe out. The air around you is cool and still. The darkness of the rooms is not the darkness of history. It is a velvet curtain drawn to protect your rest. There are no marches to make, no battles to fight. The world is quiet. The moon is watching over you, just as it watched over the kings and the shepherds 1,000 years ago. A silent silver guardian that never changes. Let your thoughts drift like a small boat on a calm lake. The water is smooth as glass. The stars are reflecting on the surface. You are safe, you are warm. The history book is closed on the shelf. The night belongs to you. Let the silence wrap around you. Let the rhythm of your breath be the only sound you hear. Deeper, softer, drifting, sweet dreams.